All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's call this special meeting of council to order. Can I get a motion, please, that the agenda for the April 23rd, 2019 special meeting of council be adopted as presented? Councillor Bevan will make that motion. Any questions, comments, or concerns? Hearing none, all those in favor? Motion carried. Reports from administration. Can I get a motion, please, that council approve the 2018 year-end financial statements as presented? Councillor Bevan will make that motion. And we are joined now by our wonderful auditor, Shannon Barford. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. So I'm going to go through the financial statement, which you're going to approve.
We will see. We'll see what you have to say.
You guys all got it in a package, and so I hope you've had a look through it. And if you haven't, that's okay. We're going to go through some of the highlights. If you have any questions throughout, I'd appreciate if you would ask them. I like dialogue. I think it makes things a little bit more interesting, especially when we're talking about numbers and no one's interested in numbers always. Me and Sarah. All right, so I'm going to go to page 1, which is the independent auditor's report, and it's actually the third page in. And so this is the report that we prepare that basically says we have audited the financial statements and we have found no problems with them. So they've changed the report a little bit from prior years. The opinion is now at the very top where it used to be kind of at the end, and they've made it a whole lot longer, so there's a whole lot more paragraphs in here. But basically the second paragraph in states that in our opinion the financial statements present fairly in all material respects the financial position and results of operations for the year. So that's a clean audit opinion, which is what you want from a financial statement, an audited financial statement. The rest of the financial statement outlines what management's responsibility and outlines what the auditor's responsibilities are, and I wasn't going to go through it in detail. So I was going to skip over to the consolidated statement of financial position, which is a snapshot of the assets and liabilities, so the assets and the debts of the town at your year-end date of December 31st. So this is a constantly moving amounts, but these are the amounts at December 31st. And I'm going to go through some of the highlighted items and some of the ones that have big changes to them. And if you have any questions, again, please just ask as we go along. So cash and temporary investments, you have $22.9 million, and basically this is cash that's in the bank. There's a little bit in investments. It also does include, your financial statements include the consolidation of 25% of the West Yellowhead Regional Waste Management Authority. So in your numbers includes 25% of the cash, 25% of their assets, 25% of their revenues, 25% of their expenses. So those are consolidated into your numbers because you are a partnership with that organization. Your receivables, your property taxes have gone up. Receivables slightly, so there's just a slower collection on those amounts. Trade and other receivables are $3.3 million, so these are just amounts owing to the town. They're just grants, utilities, amounts like that. Very similar to what they were last year. Land held for resale is the land that you guys are reselling, so it's your Tiffin lots and your commercial lots, or not Tiffin, your Hillendale lots and your commercial lots for the most part, and they have gone down a bit because there were some sales in this 2018 year. And your other financial assets is accrued interest, so it's interest that's been earned up to December 31st but hasn't yet been paid and was paid subsequent to year end. So your total assets, financial assets, are $28.2 million, and your liabilities, or debts against them, are accounts payable, which you can see are up about $600,000 from last year, and most of this relates to construction advances for the wastewater treatment plant. So it's just there were more amounts owing, which were paid subsequent to year end. Your deposit liabilities is mostly development permits, deposits. That's what makes up most of that balance. Deferred revenue is money that you have received for a specific purpose, but the purpose hasn't been incurred. So it's grants that have been received for a project, but the project hasn't been started or completed. The monies haven't yet been spent. So of that amount, there's about $1.9 million of MSI money that is for the multiplex project, right? It's for a future project? It's for a future project. Okay. The provision for landfill closure is $1.3 million. So this is the liability for both the closure of the landfill and the post-closure costs to do the monitoring for the landfill once it is closed. So it's broken down into two parts. It has increased $241,000 from last year to account for some of the extra costs that we think we're going, or Sarah and I thought were going to be incurred as a result of what's been happening out there lately. So we have pretty much accounted for our best estimate as to what the closure costs for that one cell are. And then the post-closure costs will continue to accrue because they are actually significantly higher than what we have in the books here, but they will not be incurred until the landfill is actually closed permanently, like not just the temporarily closure. So those amounts will continue to accrue depending on what the future of that landfill is, which is unknown to us at this time. Your other liabilities are the prepaid evergreen requisition and an amount for the landfill liability for the West Regional Waste Management Authority. So there's about $84,000 in there for that landfill liability. And then,
Go ahead, Councillor Barr.
Through the chair to Ms. Barford. So for the landfill closure, that liability that will incur into the future, is that included on this December 31st statement, or does it
so there is
put off?
some of it. How a landfill liability is funded is that you know a landfill is going to be operational for 40 years. And so over those 40 years, as the landfill is being used, you accumulate the liability in proportion to what has been put into the landfill, so that by the time the landfill is filled and has to be closed, you have enough liability in there. So that's what we have been doing with the post-closure costs to date. The problem now is we don't really know what the future length or life of the landfill is, because it will depend on what your future plans are for it. So we have kind of estimated it going forward, assuming that there will be additional cells developed in the area. But if it is closed permanently, then there will have to be a significant accrual for the post-closure costs. And those costs are like 25 years of monitoring after the closure date. That's what the post-closure costs will amount to.
Okay, thanks.
All right, thank you. You can continue.
So long-term debt is $13.9 million. New this year in long-term debt were some capital leases. So how capital leases work is when you are buying equipment on a lease agreement, and the intent is really that by the end of that lease, you'll have either paid lease payments that amount to the total amount of what the asset's worth, or the lease term is over the complete life of the lease. Effectively, you call those capital leases. You set the asset up as an asset, and you set the capital lease up as a liability. So there's about $550,000 of capital leases in your long-term debt that are new this year. And then the decrease is because you've been making payments on the rest of your debentures. There was about $800,000 of principal payments made on your debentures this year. So you come to a net financial asset number of $4.6 million versus last year of 5.9. So the net financial asset, the idea behind that number is if you were to liquidate all of your assets, all of your financial assets, you would have either enough or not enough money to pay out all your debt as it stands in this state on the financial statements. So when you're in a net financial asset position, that's meaning you have the financial assets to cover currently all of your debt. That doesn't take into account any future plans that might be happening with the organization. It is just as of the date of these financial statements.
Shannon, if I could. So when it comes to net financial assets, I was just looking at financial statements for some other municipalities, and I see they're in a net debt position. That's obviously not something that we should be striving for, but how do municipalities end up in that situation?
Well, the net debt position, because if you look at what's in your financial liabilities there, you have $14 million of debt that's going to be repaid over the years. I think it goes out to 2036. So you have a significant number of years that this debt's going to be paid over. So you don't need financial assets in the bank right now to meet those debt liabilities, because that debt is going to be occurring over in the future, right? Okay. So for those municipalities, they have more debt, obviously. than what they have in the bank or what they have in receivables type of thing. And their plan is to basically, I would assume, use operating income like surpluses each year to finance the debt and liabilities that are accruing into the future.
Okay,
Does that
thank
make
you.
sense?
Councillor Shanard.
Actually, through Shannon, the other question you said with that lease of the 500,000, so that, I mean, I understand the lease, but that would affect our borrowing power. So hypothetically, because we're moving towards the lease, it counts as a debt against us?
It is
Would that-
counting as a debt in these financial
Right,
statements.
so would
Yeah.
that affect our borrowing power? Because I mean, if we're moving to and all of a sudden we have leased the equipment, which is easy for a town to do, let's say 1.5 million of leased equipment, and then so that would count against our borrowing power because that is a debt.
Are you talking into like that calculation of the
Yes.
debt ratios and stuff like that?
Yes.
It was my understanding that it was, but Mike, you're thinking that leases, capital leases don't factor into there?
Yeah, I honestly, through Chair, I wouldn't be confident to answer that. My gut feeling was that they're not, but we can certainly confirm that.
Councillor Sorensen.
I have a question about the land held for resale. Is that value go up and down with assessments, or is it cost?
It's cost,
Okay.
yeah. And cost was from historical cost, right? So some of that land is at some very low values.
Right.
Yeah.
At cost value.
Yeah,
But it could
at
be
that
valued
time.
much higher. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Continue on.
Okay. All right, tangible capital assets then are your property, plant, and equipment. This is your infrastructure, your buildings, your equipment, that type of stuff. So this is the depreciated value of it. And you can see that it's gone up about $6 million from last year. So the two factors that apply in here are that you purchase new assets each year, but you also depreciate the existing stuff. So there was about $12 million of assets that were added to this capital asset calculation this year. And then your deductions were, there was some depreciation on it. There's about $4 million of depreciation. And the other thing that happened this year is we did a complete write-down of the rec complex because it was no longer available for use. And so there's a $2.5 million deduction from the capital assets for that write-down. And you'll see that it'll also flow through on the financial statements as a cost effectively to the town for this year. Inventory for consumption is the inventory that's basically held out at the yard. That's like the supplies for water, sewer, gravel for roads, that type of stuff. So those are stuff that, that's what it is for the most part. So the bottom line then, when you look at your assets minus your liabilities, and then you add back in your non-financial assets, you have an accumulated surplus of $119 million. And this is made up of three things. It's an unrestricted amount, it's a restricted amount, which are the amounts that you have put into reserves, and then it's also the investment that you have in capital assets. So we have a note that Sarah's just going to bring up on the financial statements that's going to kind of detail a little bit what makes up exactly this $119 million. Because if you look at this, it's saying that you have $119 million of assets. But when you look at the note, so you have unrestricted surplus, and I broke it down between what your surplus is for unrestricted and the surplus that relates to the West Yellowhead Regional Waste Management Authority. So $516,000 is in the unrestricted surplus at the end of 2018. Then there's restricted surplus that's from the West Yellowhead Regional Waste Management Authority. It's like a tongue twister. And $3.7 million that's in your operating reserves, $14.7 million that's in your capital reserves, and then $100 million is the equity that's in capital assets. So of that $119 million, a significant portion relates to the infrastructure that you have in the town, and it's not liquid assets that you can do anything with. All right. So going back to the statement of financial position, when you look at it as a whole, you're looking in a very good financial position because you have cash in the bank, you have net financial assets, which means you have assets available to pay debt, and you have $114 million in tangible capital assets. But what you have to remember is this is just a point in time. So your tangible capital assets aren't liquid. They're not an asset that someone's going to be come and buy, other than maybe some of your equipment and stuff like that. So it's not creating resources for you to be able to finance operations with. It's providing services to the town. And it also doesn't take into the fact the account that you have committed $18 million to future projects or programs through restricting funds for your reserves. And it doesn't take into account the future plans of the town, which might require more on an annual basis. You might be expending more than what you are bringing in any given year. So it's planning for what those future projects might be. Were there any questions, any other questions on this statement? All right, so I was going to go to the next page, which is a statement of operations. So this shows the revenues and expenses of the town for the year. So this is all the revenues and expenses from January to December. And when we look at it kind of line by line, I'm just going to highlight the ones that have changed a little bit. So you can see that government operating transfers are less than what was budgeted, because it was budgeted at a higher amount for the Yellowhead County's contribution. And it's less than last year, because last year there were some extra grants for Fire Smart, is what makes up the majority of it for the operating transfers. User fees and sales of goods. The difference here is basically the land sales that happened this year versus what was budgeted. So a higher amount was budgeted, but this year was higher than last year. So that explains most of the change between budget and last year. Your investment income is just a conservative budget. You can see that as long as there's the money that's in the bank, your bank account earns interest. And so that as long as there's the balance that's in that bank account, you will have interest rates in the vicinity of what you've been having in the last couple of years. As you spend that money, then that interest that you are earning, of course, will go down. So fines are basically or mostly from policing and photo radar. So you can see that they're up from budget and up from last year, and that's most of the increase. There's also then a corresponding increase in contracted services for the contractor who provides the service for the photo radar. The contributions for operating is the Repsol amount that's paid each year. And your gain on sale of tangible capital assets is from the sale of equipment. So most of the equipment that was sold this year had been depreciated down to very low amounts. And so when you got proceeds from them, they were more than what the book value of that asset was, and there was a gain that's recognized in the financial statements. And the last item there is the revenue from the West Yellowhead Regional Waste Management Authority. So this is the 25% share from their financial statements of revenues. Your expenses, general and administration, there's some changes from budget and from prior year, and most of it has to do with wage costs is the reason for most of the change in there. Protective services, the decrease from budget and from prior year are mostly related to decrease in policing costs and decrease in bylaw expenses. Roads and equipment, road, streets, and equipment, a lot of the change here from prior years basically with regards to wages, and they're very similar to what it was budgeted amounts. Utilities, in utilities, there was a budget for the debenture interest on the wastewater treatment plant. There's too many W's in this. And what happens is when you're building a project like that, the interest on the costs incurred while you're in the construction phase are capitalized and included as part of the cost rather than as an expense in the financial statement. So that's some of the reason for the change in utility amounts there. The planning and development, this amount here relates to the cost of the land that was sold. So that's the reason for the changes between the years, or the significant portion of the costs. And in recreation and parks, the big amount here is the $2.5 million write-down of the rec complex, as to why it's significantly different from what was budgeted and what it was last year. So you can see that you have this year a shortfall of revenues over expenditures of $230,000, which is unusual for you guys, but a big chunk of it, well, all of it, a lot of it is the write-down of that $2.5 million. So if you didn't have that amount in there, you'd actually have a $2.3 million surplus in there. Your government capital transfers are grants that you get to fund capital projects. So there's $1.6 million, and this was basically grants that were applied for roads, the wastewater treatment plant, and parks. And the contributed capital assets are a result of the hospital infrastructure that was put in and paid for by the hospital. Because it's your infrastructure, it gets included into your records. And so what happens is we basically show a contributed asset as a revenue in the financial statements, and then it gets recorded as a capital asset and depreciated over time. So you have a 4.7.
Just hang on one second here. Councillor Curry and then Councillor Byron.
Can you just clarify on the government capital transfers, why that number is so much lower than what was expected and compared to last year?
Compared to last year would be the wastewater treatment plant. You would have gotten more grants. I didn't even look at that to refresh myself too.
Trying to bring my brain around to it as well.
Would it be the $2 million that we were expecting
Was it-
that we did not get?
It could be that. I would have budgeted that coming in as a transfer.
Okay.
As a grant coming in,
Yeah.
which we did not receive. Thank you.
I would have it, yeah. It's still not
Yes.
a million, because I'd only would have it as that 3.6.
Okay, Councillor Byron?
Through the chair to Shannon. So with the $2.5 million for the rec complex that we write off, can you explain how that is $2.5 million? Like, wouldn't an asset depreciate over time, even with accounting, that it maybe wouldn't be valued that greatly?
That asset was brought into the books, I want to say like 3 years ago-ish. And so when it was, because at that point it was controlled by the rec complex group, right? And so that wasn't actually on the books of the town until 3 or 4 years ago. So when it was brought in, it was brought in at the value at that date, which was not a depreciated value.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
All right, thanks.
Thank you. Just further to Councillor Curry's point, can we get clarification on that government transfer sent to council, please? Continue.
All right. So the excess of revenues over expenses of $4.5 million. This is the surplus that was generated this year. And the money that you generate in your surplus is then you used to purchase capital assets, to fund future reserves, or to pay debt. And so there was like $9.7 million of assets purchased this year. Some of it was from your operations, some of it was from reserve funds you already had set up. There was $800,000 of debenture principal that was paid, so that comes out of this $4 million of surplus. And then the funding of the reserves also comes out of this $4 million surplus. So it's not that it went into the bank account because you used it for other expenditures.
Okay.
Okay. The one other thing I wanted to say about this statement is that it's not prepared on a cash basis. So it's prepared on an accrual basis where we account for expenses that are owing as of this date or payable as of this date. So it doesn't mean that this $4.5 million is the amount that should flow into or out of cash. Because of the accrual basis and also because of the purchase of capital assets and stuff like that. So basically that's your financial statements. This is your statement of operations, which says that you had a surplus this year. You've used that surplus to purchase equipment. When we went through your surplus has increased from last year, but most of that increase is a result of buying capital assets, right? So you used your money, you bought capital assets, you have more accumulated surplus than you had last year, but it's not in cash, it's in tangible assets. And the only other note that I was going to bring your attention to was the salary note disclosure. That is note 13. And it's one that we put in every year. It just documents basically the honorariums and wages that were paid to a counselor through the year. And I wasn't going to go through the rest of the statements and the notes because they're basically supplementary information to everything that was presented in those two financial statements, unless someone had some specific questions about
Okay,
something.
perfect. We'll open up the floor and we'll go with Councillor
Through the
Wilkinson.
chair, but to you, Sarah, just a question. On 6 there, the employee benefit obligations, how much overtime can they accrue and how much vacation time? Because then it's counted for us.
Sorry, which
I
part of
think
the?
you're in note 6
Number
here, like on the
6 here,
salary,
employee
the
benefit
wages
obligation,
payable.
Vacation
This
pay
one.
accrued, banked overtime accrued.
Page 17
Oh,
of the
okay,
financial.
thanks, right, now, okay, no. So through the chair to Councillor Wilkinson. The banked overtime, we don't usually let any of that carry over at all. They usually have to pay all that out at the end of the year.
Or just to the end of the year.
If they haven't used it. There may have just been a little bit that was overlooked to the tune of $66 for the end of 2018. Vacation accrued, they are allowed to carry over 5 days from the previous year. So they can earn what they've earned in a year and carry over 5 days from that previous year. Unless they can ask the CAO for an exemption on that, but it's pretty tough on carrying over those days, so that's generally what people can accrue and carry
That's
over.
good, then so we don't accumulate much on that, okay?
Councillor Byram.
On page 16, the schedule note number 3, can you just kind of go over the tax arrears and the difference in the amounts from 2018 and 2017?
So the current taxes receivable would be taxes that would have been assessed in the 2018 year, and the arrears taxes receivable would be amounts that are unpaid from previous years, so 17 and prior. And the increase would just be who's paid and who hasn't paid. So it would just mean that there are more unpaid tax bills at the end of 2018 compared to the end of 2017.
Okay.
One follow-up?
But, no, thank you. I think we can generally expect that economic conditions can affect that in a given year, and so as we've experienced some more challenging economic times, I don't think it's should be surprising to see that it's perhaps affected that number. I would defer to Sarah or Shannon as well, but I don't think it's at an alarming or a troubling level yet, but it's certainly something to be aware of.
Okay.
Thank you. Councillor Wilkinson.
Through the chair to Sarah again. Give Back Contracting Limited, is that our retaining wall?
Yes.
Bench
Yes, okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Councillor Sorensen.
Through the chair, I think this question is to administration. It looks like in note number 2 we have about $21.5 million in cash, but and only 200,000 in investments. I'm thinking that maybe we know we have set dates for our big capital expenses in the future. Couldn't we have some 1-year or 2-year GICs with this significant cash?
Through to administration.
Through the chair to Councillor Sorensen. We actually are looking at our investment policy right now. I'll be coming to you very shortly, just putting some finishing touches on it, and talking about those types of things. Generally, in the past, we haven't really done any investments where we weren't able to get that money back if we needed it. And because of that, I was actually getting a higher interest rate on our general account than I was on any kind of investments that were being offered, which is why the investment is very low. With this investment policy, our intention is to go out on RFP for an investment advisor, and I'm hoping with that we can then generate the better investments for us and get better interest on some of our monies that we have.
Thank you. Any other further questions, comments, or concerns? Just a follow-up to the question about tax arrears, can administration just walk through council and the media through what our process is for when people don't pay their taxes? There's quite a cumbersome process, and I know that usually when it comes time to actually go and do a tax sale, a lot of bills actually get paid, but there's legislative requirements that we have to go through. So can you walk us through that?
Certainly, Mr. Mayor. The tax recovery procedures, there's two different types of property we have. There's one where the like houses where you own the land and your property, and others like the mobile homes where you have a mobile home on land that's owned by somebody else. So once the arrears on those mobile homes reach 1 year arrears, we can start the recovery on those, and for the other one it's 2 years arrears. The recovery itself is fairly similar. We send a note into the registrar for land titled properties. They then put that on that land title, and to Alberta Registries, who put it on the serial number of the mobile home. They are notified. The owners are notified. They need to pay this amount of money by March 31st of the next year. So they're actually given another year to pay that money. If that is not paid at that time, so they're 2 or 3 years in arrears. We start the tax sale procedure, so we can advertise the property for sale. We have to sell it at a market value. It can't just be, it has to be sold at market value. And we can go through an auction to do that. All through this process, the owners are notified regularly by us or by registries that this is happening. A lot of the times we will receive the money, especially if there's a mortgage on a property. The bank will pay us the money rather than let us go to auction with their properties. They usually pay at the 11th hour, so sometimes we don't know until sort of the day before the auction that it's being paid. We can also enter into tax agreements with people. If they notify us when they get that letter saying, I'm having some issues, we can work with them and go into what's called a 3-year tax agreement, where we estimate their taxes for the next couple of years and then come up with an even amount to be paid for the next 36 months. That should help catch them up as well as pay their future taxes that are coming up. So there are things that we can do to help people catch up on their taxes if they do fall behind.
All right, thank you. And just one further question to Ms. Barford. So in your opinion, is the town of Edson in good financial shape?
Yes, as of the date of the financial statement.
Always the clarification, all right. All right, any other further questions, comments, or concerns? Hearing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Motion carried. Questions for media and public regarding items from this council meeting? You're good? All right. So we are going into a closed meeting session just to go through the management letter, which we'll do, and then we'll reopen chambers. It shouldn't take us too long. So can I get a motion, please, that we enter the closed meeting session? Councillor Curry will make that motion. All those in favor? Motion carried. All right, can I get a motion, please, for adjournment? Councillor Shinard will make that motion. All those in favor? Motion carried.
We need a recess?
Yeah, we're just going to take a 2-minute recess.
Did you put the
Okay, as Deputy Mayor, I call this meeting, the whole meeting to order. May I have a motion that the agenda for the April 23rd, 2019 Committee of the Whole meeting be adopted with the addition of a closed session item to receive an update regarding the multiplex project in accordance with the FOIP Act Section 24A and G. Councillor Shinard makes that motion. All in favor? Carried. All right. Can I have a motion that the minutes of the April 9th, 2019 Committee of the Whole meeting be adopted as presented. Councillor Wilkinson makes that motion. Any errors or omissions? All those in favor? Carried. Moving on to executive office, we have a presentation on a draft council procedural bylaw number 2230.
Thank you. Not many additional comments other than the memo that you have before you. It was, I think, just past due for a review of this bylaw, and have made quite significant structural changes, as you'll see. The old bylaw is there for comparison. This is basically just the parameters for the operation of council and council meetings, and so we are certainly, we'll probably defer mostly to Kayla if there's specific questions, who's done the work on the research and the crafting of this bylaw, but we are pleased to place this forward for council's consideration.
All right, any questions? Councillor Chenard?
Just with all the pages, would there be any main highlight things that we changed? Because I mean, I scrolled through it, so what would just be the main, I fully appreciate the fact we updated, so it's just, is there a few changes, just highlights?
Yeah, I think if you see in the memo there, the last paragraph
Right.
highlights the significant changes we felt would be worth noting there.
That's right, I remember seeing it.
Councillor Curry?
Sorry, I put my notes all in here, and so I'm trying to find them. Through the chair, 2 questions. Just one, I noticed in the bylaw that at no point, and I know it's kind of known, but it's never stated, quorum is in there, but it's never defined how many makes quorum. And so I just think for clarity, so it just says quorum, and it says quorum refers to, it's as referred to as the act.
Yeah, thank you. Through the chair, quorum is defined in the Municipal Government Act, so we don't feel there's a need to define it specifically in the procedural bylaw.
Okay.
Unless, yeah, and I don't believe we can actually, sometimes you have the ability by bylaw to make an adjustment, but for quorum, I do not believe the Municipal Government Act even gives us the ability to adjust that, so quorum is.
Is that a majority just?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, that's just what I meant, was what does quorum, a majority, or how many councillors that means, like 4. It's what I meant, like that adding of specific to it.
Mayor Zahara?
Yeah, we can't really put a number in there due to the fact that you may have a vacancy on council.
Okay.
But through the MGA, it's very clear that the majority of council
Okay.
has to be present. So in our case right now, it'll be 4.
Councillor Bear?
Through the chair to administration, on number 6 agendas, it'd be page, I don't know, I guess page 6 of 20. It says the meeting agenda shall be prepared under the direction of the mayor and CAO. Is that normal? Is that always the case?
I would have Kayla add if she feels so inclined. Generally speaking, the chairperson in consultation with the CAO will complete agenda to be put forward for council's consideration. Kayla, did you have anything you'd like to add for that?
Okay.
Councillor Wilkinson?
Through the chair then, just a question, if there isn't enough business, who does the call that there would be cancellation of the council meeting?
Chair?
Thank you. Administrative speaking, we generally make that in consultation with the chairperson, the mayor. I don't think it's specified in the bylaw.
Okay.
Yeah, just to clarify for council, so normally Mike and I will discuss if there's a light agenda, whether or not we need to proceed or not. And sometimes, even if there's a light agenda, we'll proceed because we know that maybe the next couple meetings are quite heavy. So I always err on the side of trying to cancel a meeting if we don't need to have it, but we've been quite busy as of late, so yeah.
I have a comment on section 4.2C. I find this section a little prescriptive, and I'm wondering if it has to be that way because of the MGA, but for instance, saying that we're going to reduce the number of meetings in July, August, and December, and then saying that when we schedule meetings, it'll be the exact same frequency, dates, times, and locations as previous meetings. Yeah, go ahead.
I don't think it's very prescriptive. It just says, and may consider the following in doing so. So it's typical that council will reduce the number of meetings in July and August and December just for summer schedule and for Christmas. And then that's just saying that instead of resetting the frequency, dates, times, locations, that council would just say, we're just going to use the same schedule as last year kind of thing. So we're going to do the same frequency, the same, just like redoing the schedule as last year. So it's, yeah, just summarizing instead of.
I just, to further on that, there's a lot of things we may do, so I don't think we need a list of things we may do, but it's just my comment.
Sure.
To the
Mayor
chair.
Wilkinson?
I think unless it's shall, it's optional. May is optional, shall is a must. And then mays, yeah.
Councillor Curry.
This is just my clarity. I know we've been here for a year and a half, but on page 5, under the following exceptions to the bylaw also apply to the committee of the whole. Part B there, members must be recognized by the chair before speaking. However, they don't need to direct questions through the chair. Have we been doing it that way? Haven't we always gone through the chair?
We didn't know.
But we don't have to. We've just did, but we don't have to do that.
So, if I may, through the chair.
The bylaw says I don't have to direct it through the chair.
So I think the intent of this was to reflect the different tenor of conversation that takes place in a committee meeting, and perhaps we can look at the wording a little bit there. I think it should be clear and must be clear that the chair is still responsible for the dialogue that's taking place, but we do have a little bit of a different manner of addressing administration and council, and a little bit of a different flow to the conversation during committee meetings, and so that's the intent of that piece there.
Thank you.
Councillor Baer?
Just a comment on 4.7. You have regular meetings shall not exceed 3 hours in length. I'm appreciative of this, especially as we've changed our budgeting procedures and kind of put it on a separate side, so they won't be a part of the regular meetings.
Wish I would have known that sooner.
Yeah.
I'm not sure we would have enacted this clause. Yeah. Some of them may
It
have
says
felt
we
like
all
3
have to.
hours, but
This clause, we didn't have a meeting length clause in the past bylaws.
Mayor Zahara.
Sure. I think that's a really important clause, just to ensure that we continue moving agenda items forward, because you can get bogged down in debate. And to Councillor Curry's point, obviously committees, we're always trying to have a little bit more relaxed atmosphere. So I know that we have been directing through the chair, but not necessarily have to do that for a committee meeting. So.
Okay.
Councillor Sharn.
On here, so we have set dates but not times of meetings, correct? I'm scrolling through it and I can't find it, so it is only dates and not times of meeting?
this, yeah, if I may, this does not address the dates and times of meetings. That's done at the organizational meeting. This
Right,
only
okay.
references that council will set a schedule in any given year for their meetings.
I have a question on notice of motion. I was just wondering, I don't know if we need it in here or for my own understanding, would a notice of motion be that I'd make a motion that we discuss something at a committee of the whole meeting, or would I make a motion that administration prepares a proposal for committee of the whole meeting, or would I make a motion that we, with the wording of an actual bylaw?
Sure. So the notice of motion idea came about is some councillors had questions on, well, how do I actually get something on the agenda? I know that was a question when I was on council previously. There's no formal way of getting something on the agenda. You can bring it to me and I could say no. And then as of right now, it could be dead in the water, and that's not the way it should be. So a notice of motion could be either or. It could be a notice of motion that I want to have a discussion to direct administration to do something, or a notice of motion to have a discussion around an idea or something like that. So if there is a specific issue or something that you want to address, you can do it through the notice of motion. There'll be a debate around the notice of motion, and then it will either fail or continue on until a committee meeting so it can be explored further. So it just to give council a little bit more, I guess, influence around the table and the ability to bring issues forward that they may or may not hear. Which hasn't, and that's, I guess, probably most councils now have that as a part of their procedural bylaws. So you may notice in the city of Calgary with Councillor Farkas, who often brings forward notices of motion and fails because he doesn't have the support around his council. That's his ability to bring those issues forward. So.
Yeah, and you'll notice that the procedure for the notice of motions is that the item will be added to the next committee of the whole agenda for additional conversation. So whether it's a concept or a policy that they'd like, a council member would like considered, or perhaps a bylaw or something of that nature, administration will then generate administration producing a report and or information to support that upcoming conversation at the next committee of the whole meeting.
Just as a follow-up, I think I would benefit from a little bit more wording on that, but go ahead, Councillor Cree.
And so, not through the chair, to administration, just kidding, was in the past one, just under conduct of the members, 12.6, unless permitted by the chair, a member may only speak twice on a motion. Was that in the past bylaw? Okay, perfect. We just have nice chairs.
That's correct.
Okay.
So I would say that this bylaw is not unlike many of our others, where we have elements in there that we can enforce, but we don't necessarily enforce.
Councillor Schneider?
Okay, yeah, with that was one of the ones I highlighted. It depends if you're asking the same question. If we're just going on and on, but if we're debating something on the meeting and someone brings up new information, so I agree, you don't speak twice on it, but it depends what the issue is. As long as it's something, I believe that as long as it's something new, because we may be discussing it and information now comes to light, whether through one of the council members asked administration a question and then the rest, so you might all of a sudden have a third question.
Yeah, thank you. That is the discretion of the chair. The way it reads is that you would only speak twice on any particular item. Yeah.
Councillor Bear?
Through the chair to administration, I also just want to comment on the notice of motion. I also feel the same way as Deputy Mayor Sorensen, that I was a little bit confused by that, and that's why my question on the mayor and the CAO forming the meeting, so it kind of sums that up for me, but I was also uncertain of what that meant.
Councillor Wilkinson?
Through the chair to administration, with the notice of motion, do you notify people ahead of time? Like in other organizations I'm in, we get notification that these are coming up at our annual meeting, and then we have a chance to discuss them with a group before we come back to vote.
I would defer to Kayla. They obviously have to appear on the agendas and some form in terms of describing what the item will be, and so at minimum that would appear on the agenda. Kayla, do you have anything else that you would add to that?
No. So they have to provide the CAO with written copy of the notice and including any supporting information and documentation. So that would be included in the agenda. So that would kind of be council's
The
notice.
notification.
Yeah.
Just a notification that I will put forward a motion at the next council meeting, for instance, for whatever reason and my background information.
Exactly.
That's
So
right.
that would all be there for council's consideration prior to.
And if I may just add to that, I think as a matter of practice, if I was looking for my colleagues' support, I think the better information I provided and the better justification for
Reason
whatever motion,
for
the
bringing it
more
forward.
likely you are to generate that support. And so, not that extensive research is required. Most of that is responsibility of administration to do that legwork, but generally providing background and rationale for a notice of motion, I think will strengthen those efforts.
I'd like to make a comment. I'm glad you asked that, because I was under the impression that it would just be a section on the agenda, notice of motions, and we would just make the motion. So it's not clear in here to me that I have to provide the written copy before the meeting in time for it to get added to the agenda.
I think just notification that you are going to make that motion and as to why you're making that motion. And that comes up at committee and then you make the motion at the council.
I think I appreciate that point there. Yep.
Moving on to public hearing section, I noticed individuals can give a 5-minute presentation. That seems excessively long from the public, but maybe that's the norm. Section 9.6.
Through the chair, in Hinton, I was just talking to Marcel, and they have a minute with council before the council meeting starts, and I was going to bring that up at our strategic planning if we could do that. But they are limited to 1 minute, and they can bring up concerns or events that are coming on or whatever, if they wish to come to the council chambers and present. And I think people do quite a bit of that in Hinton.
Just to clarify, this is for public hearings, so when you have to have a public hearing with
okay.
respect to like a bylaw or something like that, it's to a maximum of 5 minutes, so I'm doubting that it would be very often that someone would speak that long, but I mean, we could look at shortening it, but it's just dependent on the issue.
If I was to give my perspective, I'd say if anything, that's longer than you would want it to be, but I don't know that I would describe it as excessive, and I support Kayla's statement there that I think it would be unusual for that to be a problem. Most people are pretty concise in their statements in a public hearing, but that's again, thanks for that feedback.
I have another comment, 9.9, and this is, this section to me is open to several interpretations. How do we determine when the business is concluded? Does that mean there's nobody standing in front of the mic anymore? Or does it continue on and on until there's nobody standing in front of the mic? So I'm thinking that maybe we do need a time limit here. Let's say at the 3-hour mark, we are forced to make a vote to continue or to close. It's just a thought.
Yeah, so if I may add to that, that is inherent, I think, because the public hearing is part of a council meeting, and so the 3-hour time limit would apply. So
okay.
you must do that regardless.
Okay.
But I think I appreciate the comment there of some clarity. What does the conclusion of the business mean, and a continuance, is that just at the discretion of the chair, or is there some triggers, or?
Sorry. I debate if there's clarity needed there. It's pretty clear, like the business of a public hearing is related to bylaw number blank, and so and it says in 9.8 that everyone who wants to speak needs to be given the opportunity to speak. So once that's happened, maybe at the discretion of the chair, maybe someone will want to speak again. But after that, that's the conclusion of the business. Once everyone has said their piece, there's nothing else to be said. So then, and then it would be at the discretion of council. If things were going too long and a continuance may be needed, that's where the chair would call for a motion of a continuance, and that would be at the discretion of council whether they are going to pass or fail that motion.
Yeah. Just to continue on with that thought, let's say it's good to know that the 3-hour rule applies here, but let's say at the 3-hour rule there's still people standing at the mic. I'm still not clear if the chair can just declare the public hearing closed, or does or let's say a motion is made to continue, the motion to continue fails. Does that mean the meeting is closed, or does that mean that we continue on past the 3-hour mark?
So a motion for continuance means that you would close the public hearing for that time and establish a new date for reconvening the public hearing. So if the motion passes, then the chair recesses that public hearing to that date and time that was clarified. If the motion fails, then
But there's still 2 more options. That's my point. that we can close it or we can continue.
Yeah. So
I think
I-
also taking into consideration 9.8 is that we're assuming that everyone has had a chance to speak who wants to speak at that point. I think if we were to play this out, we're at 3 hours, there's still people that want to speak. Council has a vote on whether or not they want to extend the meeting. That would be the first vote that would need to take place. Let's say that fails, then I would think that the follow-up vote would be to ask for a continuance of the public hearing, which means the public hearing remains open and then would just be reconvened on a future date. So I think that would be the order of events if that was to transpire.
Councillor Wilkinson?
Through the chair, possibly we should change that. The shall be 3 hours, it could be shall, or by vote of council can be extended. Just put that in there so that we have that option. Not that it shall end in 3 hours, we have to have
I
the
like
option.
I personally like the fact that we are forced to make a vote at the 3 hour mark.
Yes, exactly, but we should be able to make a vote at
Yeah,
the 3 hour
yeah.
mark.
that's
And this
it.
way it says shall end in 3 hours, so it really has to change a little bit there.
Councillor Chenard?
I just found one of my questions, I was scrolling through it, where it's part 4 meeting, where it says time, time, dates, location, meeting. Council will hold regular meetings on dates, times established at the organizational meeting. If a regular council meeting falls on a statutory holiday, the meeting will take place at the next business day. Shouldn't that say council date? So that means if it falls on a Tuesday, we're gonna have it on a Wednesday?
That's correct.
That's the old bylaw.
Are you should
Oh, that's the old
bylaw?
one.
That's- I
That's
read
what I
that in
got.
the old one too,
I
Jane.
know I'm reading it, I'm saying, okay, yeah, so
Yeah. Yeah, I read that.
okay, here we go. Because I read and I said, that doesn't make any sense, so that's one of the changes. So we'll go down, that makes more sense.
You know when it starts. Go, there you go.
Uh,
No.
I don't know what's in here somewhere, okay. Yeah, because I read through and I had a highlighted note, but that's the old one, so yes, it clarifies that, because I looked at it, was confusing, but the new one makes more sense.
Just
Go ahead.
back to 9.9, I can look at cleaning that up a little bit.
My next, since no one is raising their hands, 13.3 talks about recorded votes. And I am of the opinion that since everything is live streaming already, that, and I know other municipalities have done this, why not record every vote? No, so that's my recommendation, is that this section be changed to read that all votes are recorded. 13.3,
Under,
I think.
Okay, what's the name of the old one?
Recording
It said it
results
all.
of a
page
motion.
19? Yeah, page 19.
Page 19 of the bylaw.
Yeah, I think so.
Page 19 of the bylaw, 13.30.
3-0.
Oh, okay. 13.30.
Oh,
Sorry, we were looking at 13.3. I was like, oh, yeah.
13.30.
I disagree with you, Karen.
Okay, go ahead.
I disagree with you because as much as I like to think, Steve, that technology works at all times, there are times that if something went down, then we would, and something was happening and the live stream wasn't working, we no longer have that being, so I think it should, just for a matter of protocol, and because we are doing some of our council meetings outside of here, like with the schools, if anything ever happened with our live stream, then if it wasn't recorded and somebody didn't ask for it recorded, it could be missed.
I don't know.
I think I think that Councillor Sorensen suggested that every vote would be
Every vote is
recorded
recorded.
regardless of where you are,
instead of
location.
just
So,
every
So you don't have to
vote.
request it?
so
Okay, sorry.
am I suggesting, Councillor Sorensen, that in the minutes each councillor's name would be
Yeah.
listed?
Unless it's unanimous, but if it's
Yeah.
not unanimous, then
Yeah.
it's a recorded vote.
Okay, sorry.
So it's transparent and recorded in forever. Yes.
Isn't that covered in 13.29?
So right now, the minutes reflect like the split of the vote, so 4-3, but they do not indicate who voted in which manner.
Right.
Oh.
So the point of the recorded vote is if you specifically as a counselor want your vote known on a certain issue.
Mayor Zahara?
I've thought about this because we've had some discussion with other councils because they do different things, different places. I personally like councillors asking for a recorded vote because it makes known that this is an important issue to them. I don't see the need to have every motion tracked on who's voting yes, who's voting no. If it's that important, then I think a councillor can certainly request that, or the mayor could request a recorded vote. I kind of like how it's set up right now, and it makes it a little bit easier for administration. Yes, we do have it live stream, but at the end of the day, I don't think anybody goes through the minutes, and nobody goes through the live stream that much to care that much. But I like it the way it is, personally.
Councillor Bear?
Through the chair to administration, I have to agree with Councillor Sorensen. I think that there is some value in having that, and sometimes you don't realize the value until after the vote has taken place with how a vote may have went. And I would also like to have the names, if it's not unanimous, the council names written as well.
Councillor Schneider?
I would have to agree the old way. I would agree with the mayor. I prefer it the other way. If a councillor feels strongly that way, they make a recorded vote rather than, and it saves a lot of time. So most times, instead of making them all, if you feel that strongly, make a recorded vote. That's the best way of doing it.
We agree on something?
If I may just add as well, we'll have to just check with the Municipal Government Act. It does reference recorded votes in the MGA specifically, and so our bylaw obviously cannot supersede that. The language it says there is that a councillor may ask for a recorded vote, and so I'm not sure we'll be able to limit an individual councillor's ability to do that, but.
Agreed.
Okay.
Agreed.
Is there any other comments, questions?
I don't think we have a resolution on that. I'd like to hear everybody else's thoughts.
I'd like to have a call for a recorded vote if you think it's important.
I'll second that.
Yeah. Recorded vote, call for it.
Do you have clarity now?
I think the majority of council is okay with the current method of recording votes. That's what we're taking from this. Sorry, is there more general feedback on that? There's no significant time pressures on this at all. So my suspicion is that we will bring this back to another committee meeting with some of the feedback incorporated and for consideration. So this will not be the last time council gets a chance to discuss it at a committee meeting.
Okay, we'll move on to report on lobbying government effectively seminar. Administration.
Yeah, thank you. This is an item that was brought forward, and there was a number of council members who expressed interest in taking the seminar. There is the option of, as noted here, hosting the seminar, which may ultimately, I think, result in a cost savings. If 3 or 4 councillors were to go, I think the cost suddenly is pretty close to hosting it. It also gives us the opportunity to maybe consider inviting some of our regional partners to participate. So a couple of questions that administration would have for council is obviously one, is there interest in hosting the session? If so, who might be invited, and would we consider charging them for their participation, as there is a cost to the session, as well as then presumably lunch and a rental of a facility. And so we look forward to some feedback from council.
Councillor Wilkinson?
Through the chair, I'd like to see us host this, and I'd like to see him, like Creighton Valley, any that we were talking about forming that regional partnership with, invite them all to come. And I think we should just take on the costs, and I think we should rent the dance hall.
I'm not sure that was Councillor Chenard.
I would have to almost agree with you. Would we have to, I would totally agree, if we're trying to go regional, this would be a good faith of the town of Edson hosting it, because if I'm understanding, it's $2,500 is the cost. And then
Plus travel.
Plus the travel. So we'd be looking at probably total cost about $4,000 with food, travel, rental.
I think Presumably, yes.
And I'm thinking that would be a good faith thing moving forward, like,
Yes.
bringing it, because in a lot of times, I guess we learn that AUMA, when we're lobbying as a group, when we get the other towns in with us, it would actually give a great value, and I believe the lobbying thing I would enjoy the refresher to have someone tell me how to lobby correctly, because I have my own way, but I'm also about change, so this would be great value.
Councillor Bear?
Through the chair to administration, I also would like to see this seminar brought here, as Councillor Wilkinson has suggested too. And if we could include Yellowhead County maybe in that invite as well, for some type of a regional economic committee or whatever you want to call something like that. And I would leave it open to administration to determine the location and food. So, thanks.
Councillor Crean?
I would also support us hosting this. When Yellowhead County has done a few of the seminars at the beginning when we got elected and invited us, did we pay to go?
Yep.
Do we get
We didn't pay.
to see Mr. Cuff?
We were hosting.
So definitely invite Yellowhead County for free and the rest of you can pay. I'm okay with us not charging them, but yeah.
Any other comments?
I
Oh,
agree.
sorry, Mayor Rivera.
I fully support us hosting. I do think we should charge for the meal, though. I don't think the town of Edson taxpayers should be picking up the tab for that. But as for the hosting costs and the seminar costs, I think that we can cover that. But that's just my thought.
I will support the mayor's comment. Mayor, Councillor Wilkinson.
All right, I just wondered if we should invite Community Futures, not that they are a lobbying group, but when we talk about what our priorities are as a group, and the representatives were talking how they also have the idea of tourism, for instance, so any of these things that we're talking about, informally or formally, I think it would be nice to have the Community Futures group here as well, because I think we should be working with them.
Yeah, my if I may, through the chair, my only thought on that is I think it becomes problematic to expand it beyond our municipal partners, because then why Community Futures and not the chamber, or
Okay, that makes sense.
and then there's a whole nother question that goes beyond that. If I may, just to go back, so I think generally speaking, we've hosting, good. Okay, then some of the specifics. Jasper, Hinton, Yellowhead County. Did you want us to go beyond that? That's our typical.
Whitecourt, Drayton, and
Whitecourt,
Rocky.
Rocky.
Rocky?
Yeah, Rocky.
Is council supportive of that?
Yep.
I
Just to clarify, the more people that are there, the more expensive
the more
it gets as
expensive
well,
it
and we
gets.
don't have a good feeling on that. So
Yeah.
up to 24 is the 2,500, and then for additional participants, it can cost more. So
May I suggest that we open it up to Hinton, Yellowhead County first, and then look at Whitecourt, then Drayton, and then Rocky if we don't have enough
Get a
interest.
feel what's going on.
sure.
I have a comment that we limit it at 24 people. That's my comment.
Yeah, we could, just send representatives.
I would have
Councillor
to,
Schneider?
I would have to agree on that limit to 24, but I would include food. I feel, I mean, even though it's taxpayers' money we're spending, okay, the seminar, but you have to pay to eat, so I would say 24, and it would be something, so who knows, God,
If I may, Councillor, I do want to have that conversation, but I'd like to kind of finalize
let's
the
get cost back.
who we would invite first there. But
Do you have enough clarity on that?
I do not. The mayor made a suggestion that we would start with our most close regional partner, which would be Hinton, Yellowhead County, Jasper. There, okay. And then if we were to achieve 24, we would consider it full. Whitecourt, Drayton Valley, the next invitation, and then if beyond that there was room, we would consider Rocky Mountain House. Is that? Does council have support for that? Okay, good. Kayla, yes, sir.
Sorry, are we putting a cap at 24 with our, because if we invite, well, so ourselves and then Hinton, and Jasper and Yellowhead County, they would, if all of them RSVP'd, yes, they were going to attend, it would exceed 24.
So,
May I suggest that we would just assume the costs associated with that initial invitation?
Yeah.
Okay.
Is council comfortable with that?
If it's one or two over 24.
That's right. And beyond that, if it doesn't reach 24, we can extend the invitation to the other 3 communities that council has identified. Thank you, Kayla.
For the remaining seats.
That's right. That's right. For the meal or for additional costs and or any charges that would be passed on to the participants, if council can discuss that.
Councillor
The
Wilkinson.
chair, I can make chili if you want. Like, I can. I mean, if we don't want to pass it on to the taxpayers, I certainly don't.
I apologize, Councillor Wilkinson, your gesture is welcome, but we cannot as the municipality assume the liability risk.
Councillor Mayor.
Through the chair, as the mayor has suggested, if there's a $20 per meal or whatever charge that is to the participants, I'm fine with passing that on to the municipalities that would be accepting that. And also perhaps it would maybe encourage the people who are accepting that invitation to attend.
Mm-hmm.
So a $20 for meal, is everyone comfortable with that? Okay. Any other feedback, or Kayla, do you have any other questions on that item?
Councillor Curry.
My only feedback would say, just knowing the cost of him is, and maybe it wouldn't be any different for them, but if any of those surrounding communities that we're saying to come next, if they wanted to chip in for the extra money, so say White said, we'll pay the $500 if we can bring people so that they don't have to pay the whole amount. So increasing the number, if those communities said, hey, can we partner with you to host this? If they heard about it, that we were doing it and wanted to partner.
Good idea, we'll just pay the transportation once.
Yeah,
Right.
like if somebody said we want to partner.
We can certainly extend that offer, if council's comfortable, to the 3 additional communities that were identified. If they're willing to pay the additional cost, they would obviously, we would be happy to facilitate the session.
Yeah.
All right. Moving forward.
It took almost as long as the financial statements.
Well, we're talking money.
We're moving on to infrastructure and planning. Proposed land transfer to the Edson Golf Club. Plan 812-1508, Block 1. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr.
Mahaney.
Chairman, members of council. Being respectful of your time, I won't rehash the entire report. However, I will note that this is with regards to seeking direction from council on how to proceed with the disposal or retention of the lands where the rec complex was located until very recently. Currently, staff's understanding is that the expectation was that this $318,000 property would be sold back to the golf course for $1. However, we could not find any legally binding contract which required you to do so, so you are unfettered in your decision from our understanding, which means that you could proceed with declaring these lands surplus and selling them on the open market for market value, or simply retain the lands for future municipal use. If there's the expectation that this would be sold back to the club for the $1 that it was obtained for, we would ask for direction as such, and we will target the end of May to bring forward the report declaring these lands as surplus. And then we of course have to do a public advertisement for their sale below market value to a not-for-profit group under Section 70 of the Act, and you would then be allowed to make that motion at that meeting.
Okay, Mayor Zahara.
Yes, through to administration, I think that our verbal communication with the golf club through this process is that we will transfer the land back to them for $1, and I am fully in support of that, and would like to get this process underway as soon as possible.
Councillor Shinai.
2 times in one night, I 100% agree with the mayor. I totally agree that we shall sell it, or I think we should sell it back for $1, same price we paid for it.
Councillor Curry.
I'm going to say something even crazier. I 100% agree with Councillor Shinai.
I just would note that that's been live streamed, Councillor Curry, just so you know. That's out there.
Would you like to report about it?
Since no, Councillor Wilkinson.
Well, I just think number 2 really is deja vu, isn't it? Sell the lands at market value to anyone.
Just to be clear, administration is only fulfilling our obligation to make sure council knows their options. We are supportive of the understanding that the mayor suggested, and it has always been our impression that that is council's wishes. There is just currently no formal agreement in place.
Councillor Barron.
Through the Chair to Administration, I just also have to agree with the $1 sale back to the golf club.
Since no other hands raised, I have a couple questions. I am in full support of selling this for $1 back to the golf club. My question is, this includes all of the parking lot and the clubhouse area, correct?
Yeah.
There's no lands that we would retain at all.
Mr. Chairman, just for clarity, what I can do is pull up on our map here so you can see the title which is retained by the town and would be sold, and that would be this block right here. This green area.
I would
There
just-
is a dedicated road
roadway.
which provides for access, but this entire property right
We
here.
would retain that road.
Yeah, it is not inconceivable to me that we would probably consider at some future date closure of that road, but that is a separate process. But,
Okay.
yep.
And I was, Councillor Bear.
Just a question. So this, through the Chair to Administration. So this doesn't have any implications with the current zoning of that lot. It's still considered parks.
Yeah, sales do not affect the zoning of a property.
Okay.
I have a question on, I assume that in the MGA, there's a reason for the public advertising, and what could happen as a result of that? Could someone oppose this? Could someone make an opposing offer? What are all the options that could happen from that advertising?
Mr. Chairman, if it was a not-for-profit or, for example, a school, we'd have the ability to dispose of it for less than market value as a choice of council. If it's not a registered not-for-profit, which this society didn't show up in our listing search for a not-for-profit society, there are certain golf clubs that do. You are essentially selling it to a business. Now, to ensure that municipalities are disposing of their assets, which are publicly owned, in an ethical fashion for appropriate value, the advertising is required. That could have other people come forward to provide new information to council. However, it is at your sole discretion as to what is deemed to be an appropriate value for its sale, even if that is $1, provided you do that openly and publicly, which includes an advertising requirement.
If I would just add to that, there is always the potential for residents of the community to petition any decision of council or any action of council. And so that is, I think, the course of action that might conceivably be taken if a group of citizens was to have a major concern. They might attempt to have a petition completed, which would then, and in fact all a petition does is force council to consider the petition in their decision-making process. A petition does not bind council's decision-making. It just would add, again, more information to council's decision-making process.
So what will the advertising say? Here we're advertising this transfer of land value. If you have a concern with this, what? Write a letter to town, or does it start a petition, or what is the advertising say?
No, I don't think we would even solicit that. We would just simply note, it would be like a public notice. In this case, I think it would be important that the public know that the sale of the land is to the golf club for the purposes of maintaining that facility recreation opportunity in our community. But it would be the responsibility of a concerned citizen to respond or to take action as they saw fit.
And you said that dollar value would be in the notice?
I believe it is a requirement if you're selling for below market value.
So if someone offered $2, we would not have to take that offer?
Absolutely not.
For complete clarity to the chair and council, this is to notify the public that we're selling a property for less than appraised market value. That is all, right? And so that decision is being made publicly and transparently.
Do we have to have a written signed offer from both parties before we do this notification?
No.
Okay.
They can choose not to sign the affidavit of transfer for value if they chose to, but you don't require technically their approval.
Okay, we'll move on. to virtual tours of the wastewater treatment plant and well house. Mr. Briscoe.
Thank you,
Welcome.
members of council and Mr. Deputy Chair.
Captain, Deputy Mayor.
Obviously, that doesn't look like my wastewater plant, but just some background history. The last little while has been fairly busy. Earlier on in the year, I was approached by Compliance 365 as some of the people from AEP that does all our operator certification. They actually requested a tour of the plant, which we did actually mid-April with them. They also brought all the approvals people from AEP along with a lot of the federal regulators down to look at the plant and see how it operates and goes from there. So that kind of led to some of the discussions of with this company. We actually had some conversations earlier with them. They've got some different technology, which kind of led me to the idea of, or us to the idea that it might be something that we could kind of look at, that council might be approval of, is to have an actual virtual tour of the wastewater plants, that we could have some type of link within our website so that the regular public and the people could actually see what does a wastewater facility look like. And it would be no different than kind of what you're seeing on the screen right now. It would kind of show the screen room of what you've all kind of had to privy to. Not really obviously getting into the nitty gritties of the screens and that type of stuff, but obviously it would show the process room. So if someone kind of wanted to see what's all involved in the treatment of waste within the community, what that's like. So obviously that's something, before we kind of move forward with that, we just kind of wanted to get some of the thoughts. And with that also, if we were going to do something to do with the wastewater, obviously it would make sense to pick one of our larger well house buildings and look at the CT disinfection piping and some of just a high level overview of that and just kind of highlighting some of that. So obviously before moving forward, we wanted to bring it in front of committee to get some of your thoughts and ideas if that is something that council would like to see moving forward.
Councilor Mayor?
Through the chair to Mr. Briscoe, I think this would be really nice to have. When we talk about transparency and you spend $18 million on something, and if we're not going to do regular tours, then this is an opportunity for people who are a little bit curious about this project to be able to see what's going on.
Mayor Zahara?
Yes, I totally agree. I think it's a great opportunity for people to see behind the scenes what it actually takes to operate our community. I do have a bit of a concern with doing that with the well house, just for water security reasons and possibility of somebody going on there and then getting some ideas of how to access our equipment. I think that's far more important than a tour of the well house, but for the wastewater treatment plant, I'd be fully in support of that.
Councilor Wilkinson?
Through the chair, I'm in support. I just wondered if you were aware that Adrienne Tate has a camera that takes pictures like that. When she was here, when she used to work for the paper, she talked about getting a camera like that. Her husband got it.
That's her husband that actually does the same. She's the one that approached us on some other projects, and that's at Click Solutions that you've seen there.
Oh, it'll be her doing it.
Her husband actually has.
Oh,
does
good.
it.
Okay, a local company.
Yes,
All right, I'm
you
happy.
betcha.
I'm 100% behind it. Thank you.
Councilor Sharon?
I hope the lightning don't strike me, but that's 3 times in one night I agree with you. But I would also caution, because like when we did the museum, I would caution the actual details, because when we're going through the water and stuff, all it's gonna take is some expert to say, are you sure you have the right amount of chlorine, whatever. I mean, that's what I'm detailing. I like your concept, but I'm very caution about the details and information, because too much out there, who knows out there, they might decide, you know what, now I know how to get in there for no apparent reason other than. So that's where the museum, that's public. These other buildings are not accessible to the public. So that's where I would caution differently on there. And that would be my main concern.
Councilor Curry?
I fully support this, and having looked at our changes to our website, I think it's fantastic, and I think it really helps people to understand. And as Councillor Beyer had said, I think when we get our bills and we see that amount that we're paying, it's hard for us to describe to people what we're paying for, but when we went in there and saw, it made a lot of sense. So I think that helps for our public to understand what they're paying for on a monthly basis.
Agreed. We only got 3 hours.
I'm in full support, and I commend your initiative to think this out.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna add, certainly the excuse me, the security is something that we would consider moving forward, and in terms of showing sensitive equipment, or we don't want to encourage visitors to some of these sites, which is a little bit different than the purpose of the museum, who their whole purpose is to encourage visitors. But I think we can probably effectively manage that dynamic. I personally share the mayor's view that the water sites are more sensitive and more important to maintain security, and so if we don't feel we can comfortably do that without maintaining the security of the sites, then we would not obviously proceed.
Mayor Zahara?
Russia could be looking to,
Right.
you know,
Oh, apparently
There we
not.
go.
Apparently not.
Great, thank you very much. We'll move on to the wastewater treatment plan, regulatory approval, expected cost impacts under permit to operate.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At a previous council meeting, there was an approval to address funding for some yet unresolved funds from the province with regards to our, I'm trying to think of the word here, I think it was my grants. And with that, there was the statement or the clarification that council wanted with regards to there being no further costs to the wastewater treatment plant. At that meeting, it indicated that there will be future costs related to the wastewater treatment plant, which may be essentially capital in nature, related not to its capital construction, but to meeting the rigor required by the province for its environmental approval, which was given to us as a draft near the end of November when we began testing operations, and actually issued to us actually April 1st. During that period between November and April, Darren, as well as our contract engineers, AECOM, negotiated with Environment to try to resolve some of the reclamation requirements and other items we'd be required to do. The first item there you'll see is a $5,000 plan and implementation of $620,000 related to the reclamation and creation of a receiving station. In this area, oh, that took a little while. In this area, we have the requirement to reclaim all 3 of these cells for essentially the same cost as reclaiming this 3rd cell. We can put up a receiving station, so essentially turn what would be a liability and a reclamation requirement for us into an asset, which will be addressed later within our capital planning. We still have the requirement to remediate these 2 cells. Although that does seem costly with regards to the remediation piece, I'll note that until AECOM and Darren had talked with Environment, we would be reclaiming these cells as well. A full reclamation of our entire site without use of these cells could have been in the millions of dollars. So this is actually a big win for us with regards to its time frame. This had to be agreed to or addressed as part of the regulatory plan, but again, since those costs were essentially even, gaining an asset versus just simply paying to reclaim the site, we move forward with pushing that forward. We could always go back to full reclamation if council does not wish to actually proceed with that receiving station. That again would allow us some sufficient time to put the plan forward here near the end of May, but then actually do construction over a longer period of time. With regards to the next item we want to make sure you're aware of is we have a regulatory requirement to monitor groundwater around our facility and its containment area. Looking at the desktop for spacing of the wells that would be required, our engineers have indicated we would need at least 25 groundwater monitoring wells. That capital cost, we wouldn't have to have that in place until the end of 2020, so we have almost 2 years. However, that would cost us anywhere from $500,000 to $750,000. Luckily, we have some really qualified staff, so our operational needs for that on an ongoing basis will be quite a bit smaller. We're anticipating around that $15,000, $20,000 a year because we already have staff on hand. We do have to file a professional report by a qualified individual, which does have some cost. In looking at the next one, there will be the requirement by June 1st, 2021, that we have to do a study of the river to ensure that we're meeting requirements for phosphorus and other chemicals that are being released from our station. That we have done in the past under our previous operations of a little bit different, but similar to it within the river previously. We would actually bid that out. We don't have an actual cost to provide you at this time. They're not extensive costs, but that will then lead to recommendations from the director in environment, which may have requirements for us to do upgrades. Those were discussed previously with regards to what they could be, and we've got a plant that's capable of being upgraded to meet potential requirements in the future. Hopefully it will be zero, but we can't say that it will be, as we have that future testing requirement. Anyways, this report was not brought forward for any approval by council, and is simply here for information, so you're aware of the ongoing things you'll see within our operational planning or our capital planning as we start to move through this year and the next, and will show up in that 5-year capital or 3-year operational plan. If you have any technical questions beyond the report, though, Darren's here to answer.
Councillor Shinari?
Okay, then the capital question, the one area where you said we don't have to reclaim, that will be a receiving and then it'll be piped to the main treatment plant then?
Yes, Councillor Chenard through the chair. That is correct. That long, which we call kind of pond number 4, that long station pond there.
Yeah.
What that'll be is, and there's actually already a control structure part of the existing right now, but we'll actually have the capability of when we're able to or when we want to, we'll be able to treat that within the plant. So we'll be able to open a valve at times, and we can take the waste in and basically treat that waste, drop the levels down, and then we can take the receiving waste from all over the place. Our goal is to have a station that's basically monitored and open 24/7 for the future to actually better service the future needs of the community, as we believe this is something that's important to council, and it's been discussed in the past, so it'll be similar to the other stations. So this one will have ways of monitoring, and so we can control what gets dumped. And the nice part about that is anything that's dumped into that pond technically is considered contained, so it will not upset our plant. So we can get a win-win situation, plus we can reutilizing what we have there, and it's relatively easy to put into our system.
Mr. Chair, Council, if I may, it provides a strategic asset within the area, because as we start seeing, aquifers being, further impacted by individual septic systems, or as we start to see growth and development outside of our network and in Yellowhead County, this provides a place where we can benefit from taking in that additional waste at a cost that council determines to be appropriate through a sewage bylaw. So.
Councillor Wilkinson?
I don't have a question at all, but I just appreciate you preparing this very much. It sort of tells us what financial implications we may have in the future. It's funny, you build a new building, you sort of think, well, it's done, but obviously not. But I'm glad that Environment is doing their job as well, and the river's tested, etc. So thank you very much for doing it all.
Councillor Barron?
Through the chair to Darren, I guess. So the testing that has to happen after we release our grey water back into the river, I'm just really surprised at how much this costs or to implement like that process. Is this the same for every municipality and farmer along the way that has runoff or leakage into the river of whatever they have near the river?
Councillor Barr through the chair. I guess, are you kind of referring to the monitoring wells, or just because that was mostly what the cost is? So it's really the cost is fairly normal of just an operation cost, which wasn't put into here, which is just our normal monitoring requirements we have. So the monitoring wells are actually monitoring the groundwater, and the cost from that comes from the parameters that's set out in our approval, what we need to test out of each one of those. So there's about 20-something parameters we're testing at each monitoring well before it goes, and that's just around our site itself. So we specifically didn't talk about the operational part of the discharge, because really that's not a whole lot different than what we were discharging anyway as part of our old approval to operate a lagoon system, because we were still continuously discharging as we are now.
If I may add to that as well, I think that the requirements of environment are proportional to the risk as well. The risk is greater to the environment because of the volumes and the amount of effluent that we're taking in. If an industrial operation was to have, I think, this same scale, yes, I think they would be subject to the same requirements, but like a family farm or something like this that just has a septic tank, the risk is not comparable. So.
Yeah, and I think some of the requirements they put in, like whether it's the phosphorus or what we're doing, is just kind of a normal part of the process of the plan, and also to make sure that we're meeting the future federal requirements that are coming in and the future provincial requirements that are there, just to make sure our plant is operating as designed by the approval.
Okay.
I have a question. Correct me if I'm wrong, but other than some planning this year, most of this will not occur in this calendar year.
If I may, you'll see that we are recommending that council considers the creation of the receiving station within the 2019 capital budget, but beyond that, it's future.
Physical, and just as a note, we're looking at doing work this year, which is why we're proposing it within the capital budget. It may not be done until next year, depending on how that process for design and approval through environment, because we are partly restricted by their timeframes.
So
But,
this work
but we
here-
would like to be able to move forward with its design and potential acquisition of certain aspects of the receiving station this year.
The work
If
you're
not
just talking about is decommissioning the 2 ponds. That might start this year.
You know, there's a few items, because as we do decommissioning, depending on whether Alberta Environment lets us undertake option 1, which is the standard, that will take us longer. If they agree to another proposal we're putting forward, that may move it ahead much more quickly.
All right, seeing no other comments or concerns, thank you very much. We'll move on to corporate services 2019 finalized operating budget.
And I'll just sit here with 5 minutes here.
And Ms. Bittner is moving forward.
It was included. You added it to the electronic version. She
Welcome.
handed out.
Sorry, just getting settled. We start with the finalised operating budget. There was not a lot of changes to what was passed in December. Just a couple of items to bring to your attention. You can see through the variance here, under engineering, we've added 585,000. This was for a streetlight program that I believe to have been finished in 2018, but it had not been finished. It had been carried over to 19, so I had to add it back into 19's budget. So that's why there's an increase in.
But it's funded from the energy reserve.
It is funded.
So
If you
it
look at
does-
the very bottom here, you can see that is being funded from an operational reserve. So there was no impact on the taxation at all. It was just a matter of moving it from 18 to 19. It had already been funded. Within the operating budget, one of the things we need to obviously look at now is our requisitions are known, right? So at the time it was passed in December, we didn't know the amounts for the Evergreens requisition, for the school requisition, or for the new designated industrial property requisition. The seniors requisition is now known. The operational portion has gone up from 190 to 219 for 2019. And capital remained very much the same. So there was an increase there that was needed for the Evergreen requisition. With the capital portion, we've been collecting a very steady amount for a number of years, even if there wasn't any capital projects going for Evergreens, just so that when it came time for us to give our capital portions, we weren't bringing up the mill rate. It sort of remained as steady, the same. So we have done that for a number of years. This year, once again, we're collecting 300,000 from the taxes. We have that difference between the 300 and the 357 in a prepaid amount, but that will be the end of our money that we have set aside in the future. So for 2020, if there's still a capital requisition that's above 300, you may see an increase in Evergreens for 2020. But for this year, we were able to keep it very much the same. With the provincial ones, we have the designated industrial properties requisition. This is this new one where the industry went to the province and basically requested that they do their assessment so that it was being done sort of evenly across the whole of the province instead of individual assessors doing that. they've put the cost of that back onto us to collect from those properties to send back to the province. So it's another requisition. They actually give us a mill rate, we have to apply this, we have to collect it and send it back to the province. For us, we don't have a lot of those properties, so it's about $5,000 overall for the whole of our municipality. So it's not a huge dollar value.
Mayor Zahara?
So a question through to administration on that. I know that some municipalities are saying it's actually costing them more to collect this than actually the money that they're receiving to forward on. So what's the cost to the town of Edson for doing this?
I would have to look that up, sorry, I don't have that on hand. We do invoice them quarterly for that. I just don't have that exact figure with me right now. I can let you know that in an email tomorrow and follow up on the other things as well. Okay.
Councillor Wilkinson?
Through the chair, where it says here some railroad right-of-ways and spurs, do we have something there with CN in town?
We do have a few, yes. I think overall, I think there was around 16 or 17 roll numbers that this actually affected.
Okay.
Out of our whole town.
Mm-hmm.
All right, moving on.
Okay, so I'll move on to the education property tax. So this year we have a unique situation. Usually by now we have the amount, we know exactly what we need to collect, and we can set the mill rate and go on our merry way. With the election happening, no budget was tabled, so we don't know what the education property tax is for 2019. So we do have some options. We can delay setting that tax bylaw until the further information is available. I'm not sure when that will be. That would delay the tax notices being sent out. So they wouldn't get sent out on time. It would delay us getting the money in. It would delay all of those processes further down the line. We could just use the 2018 rates without changing them. Or the one that we recommend, and how this budget has been presented, is we've gone on a 5-year average of the increases for the education tax. It's come to about 4.5%. We added that to the 2018 rates, and we've used that figure as our education property tax for 2019. This could either result in a over levy, meaning we have charged a little bit more than we needed to, or an under levy if we haven't charged as much as we needed to. This would then be put into next year. So if we do have an over levy, we would collect less next year from our taxpayers. Under levy, the opposite, we would have to collect a little bit more. We felt doing a 5-year average would be a fair way of finding an amount to just sort of add on to the 2018 rates for 19, and just have to hopefully it will come out in the wash however it comes out. So those are the options for dealing with the school tax. We can do any of those. At the moment I have applied the 4.5 and presented the budget in that way. But it is obviously up for discussion.
Seeing no hands, I agree with your recommendation to use a 5-year average of the increases. I just want clarification that if we collect too much, that is not an issue, that to collect too much taxes when it's designated for a specific purpose.
Yeah, no, just as Ms. Bittner suggested there, that we would just have to apply that money to their next year's education portion of their property taxes. So we are certainly, it must be restricted to that use.
Okay. Councillor Chenard?
So if we, since we're collecting school tax for the province, so if we collect too much, we just send them the too much, and if we're under, they're shortchanged, or?
So through the chair to
Okay.
Councillor Chenard, we don't send it in, we only send what they request of us.
Right.
If we collect too much, I do a reconciliation at the end of the year, and that sits in an account.
Okay.
So for next year, whatever money they ask us to collect, we would collect less that money that we collected the year before. So this means a slightly lower mill rate would be applied to our taxes for that purpose, to our assessment for that purpose.
Sure.
So since they caused the problem, wouldn't we better off give our taxpayers a break and charge them less and make them wait for their extra money?
If we go with the 18 rates and they come
Yeah.
in with a huge increase, we will then have to charge our taxpayers next year what they want plus what we didn't collect the year before.
So
there's never a break as far as it goes with the provincial taxes. You always have to collect exactly what they.
If I may add, the intent here for us is to try to try to be as accurate as we can with the information that we have. We want to correct as close as we possibly can to what we hope will be the amount that is required.
Councillor Bear?
So through the chair, I've got a couple of questions. So both of them are with the Evergreen and the school tax. Maybe it was my interpretation of some wording that I read somewhere was that we were only allowed to collect what has been requested. So you're saying that we can collect more than what is requested and hold that for that designated purpose?
For this instance, I actually got hold of my contact at the province and asked what our options were for this. And that was one of the options. These were the three options that he suggested to us that other people are doing. I think there are some that are putting off their tax notices, some that are just using last year, some that are doing an estimate. He said you can estimate a 2019 requisition if you like as well.
Okay. Sorry.
Go ahead.
Another question. So I think I may have noticed in the paper the Elephant County is deferring their collection. Would it be advantageous because our residents are so close to each other to consider that route? Or like, do we have an idea when we might be expecting this notice to come?
I think we feel that that's not the best course of action for a couple of reasons. One is our residents have become accustomed to receiving their tax notices at a certain time, and it may have implications that we aren't thinking of or prepared for to consider holding off on that, as well as we have no indication of timelines on this, and so it could be several months, and then at some point we obviously want the money as well to obviously fund operations and other projects and those types of things. So we feel that this course of action will be the least disruptive overall, both to our internal processes and to the processes that taxpayers have become accustomed to.
There's here.
Yeah, having actually worked on a provincial budget before, I think we really need to move forward with the plan presented by administration, because it is a cumbersome process, and with the new government coming in, we could be looking months down the road before they actually have those numbers to us. And I don't think we should be delaying our processes. This is just yet another example why the province needs to get out of having us collect school taxes. They need to get out of the playbook or out of the sandbox and allow us to do what we need to do with property taxes. It's very frustrating. So I support administration's recommendation.
Just with regards to what's been handed out, can we look at that later? That was not to be supposed to be handed out a little bit later in the meeting, so please just regard what was handed out. Thank you. Any other questions on the requisitions?
Sorry. Councillor Bear.
Through the chair to administration, I just want to clarify that I would support your decision as well. So I just wanted to know about the other options.
So we're happy with adding that 4.5? Is that okay? No, excellent. Thank you. Another part with the taxation, we have based on those requisitions, we have come up with mill rates that would generate those monies needed. Historically, we've always had a rounding of our mill rate, so we go to 2 decimal places for our combined mill rate. With that, the only one we can manipulate ourselves is the municipal one, and we just tweak it a little bit to get us to those 2 decimal places. This year, that has generated about another $8,000, about another $8,200 of taxation just due to that rounding. So I just want to keep that figure in mind when I move on to the next part of the presentation. So I've mentioned the 585 from the Streetlight program, just been moved over for 1 year. There was one other addition to the budget that we found significant enough to bring forward. That was with the wastewater treatment plant parts and supplies. We needed to add 25,000 to there. After it came online, there was some review of requirements, and there was an extra 25,000 needed as an ongoing cost year to year as well. So we couldn't use a reserve or anything like that to fund that. So I looked at the budget for that department, the sewer department. We had a budget for electricity that was for the entire year, and quite a maybe a robust estimate at this point. The first 2 months of the year were actually covered by Alpha Construction. We didn't actually pay those for the first 2 months for electricity. So I've used the 8,200 that was generated from rounding the mill rate and moved the rest from electricity up to parts and supplies to give them that 25,000. So again, there's really no impact on the taxation as either. It's still that 3.9% with that little rounding of the mill rate. And I applied that money to that particular item. So really they were the only two changes as far as what had been brought forward in December. We've now added the requisitions that are now required. And you can see that when we apply all of our debenture principal payments and everything, we still have this balanced budget for the revised budget. So that was your operational budget revision. So any other questions on that?
Mayor Zahara?
Sure. So with the sewer, so is taxation now subsidizing our sewer system? Because I thought our fees that we charge on the utility bills was supposed to cover all of that. So are we not covering that through our charges on sewer, or has this always been kind of sometimes subsidized by taxation?
Through the chair to Mayor Zahara. Obviously the 16,000 that we've just moved from one part of the budget to another is still covered from what we had there. As I say, the 82 comes from that extra rounding of the mill rate for taxation, so that will continue on, because we always look at our revenue based on the revenue we received the year before for taxes and move on from there. So with that little rounding, with that extra 8,200 we're getting, and that will now be a continual amount that we're getting from our taxation as well. So we're not actually funding it. I see what I can. I'm just trying to get my words right.
Generally speaking, generally speaking, Mayor, it
it's-
has minimal effect on the fee rates for the sewage treatment plant or our sewer processes. They are still covered almost completely by the utility rates.
Mayor Zahara?
Okay, just one follow-up. I just want to ensure that we're not looking at another utility increase anytime in the near future.
It is not administration's intention to bring that forward in the foreseeable future.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so if we're happy with...
Well, you still
If I may
have
just
three
be-
options here that no one's spoken to yet.
Go ahead.
I would advocate for, I guess, a fourth option to increase taxation from 3.9 to 4.0 and take any remaining from the electricity account, or budget, I should say. Councillor Curry?
Sorry, am I confused? You're doing this with all those three options?
Sorry, I just realised I didn't go over the three options with you.
Yeah,
My apologies on that. I was
read
going
this
straight
as
to what I'd actually
those
done. So
three
very sorry about
options
that. That was
cover
my
it.
issue there. Okay. So we could, as we reduce the electricity budget, is what we spoke about, we could review other departments and reduce budget amounts where feasible. We had a look through. It's a fairly tight budget this year, and we felt with sewer being the one that needed that money, was it fair to take some off somebody else when they've been quite good with their budgeting. And the other thing was actually to increase taxation from 3.9 to 4.05, which would generate that extra $8,200 that you need, that you saw on the sheet there. So we could do that as well. I'm very sorry I forgot to mention those options to you.
Councillor Curry?
But if we did option 3, that'd be going back to what the mayor was saying, that now we're paying for it through taxation.
to balance the budget this year. Yes, I believe when we did the sewer budget, if you remember back to the workshop, it was a long time ago. I know we were still a little bit in the black there with sewer. So and with the new plant coming online, we are going to have to be revising some of those allocations within that budget as well. Like I mentioned, the electricity. I think we had a new contract with NMAX. It's a lot lower than what EPCOR were charging, for example. So there may be some even savings within that we can allocate to that 25,000 that they need.
So no one, Mayor Zahara.
Must be getting late because I'm getting a little confused here. I guess my initial thought on this is if we reduce electricity because we weren't operating the plant for 2 months this year, that just puts us in a position for next year where we're going to be short again for 2 months. At the same time, I think I want to hold steady at 3.9. We worked hard to get to that amount, and we need to find the money somewhere. So I think there's opportunities that you have indicated there that I think we should do. Having said that, 82, 3.9, 4.0, not really a big difference to the individual taxpayer. But
if I may, through the chair, we took into consideration the future impact of making that change in the electricity budget, and we are fairly confident that that is a change that we can sustain in future years. Obviously, we're still relatively new in the process of and learning about the operations of the plant, but we're hopeful that that won't cause an issue moving forward.
Councillor Wilkinson.
I'm for option 1 or 2, definitely not 3.
Councillor Schorner.
I must be getting tired too, because I have to agree with the mayor. We got to stick to 3.9. We did work hard at that number, so I like what we're saying is option 2, review. Yes, I understand the sewer treatment plant, we're going into unknowns, but the 3.9 we have to stick to. Have to. That's what we worked hard to get. So figure it out.
Councillor Curry.
I support the reduced electricity budget. The suggestion that you said, and then using that round up for that extra 8,000, your suggested option.
Thank you.
Councillor Bevan.
The same way, I was reduce the electricity. Same thing, Councillor Curry.
Councillor Baer.
As well, reduce the electricity budget, and then if something changes over the course of 2019, we can kind of further reflect on it over a budget this fall.
Okay, I think you have direction.
Just to be clear, leaving from this meeting, we'll be calculating the mill rates. So this is the time. This is it. This is kind of the last moment for council to. It obviously once the mill rate bylaw is before you, that's not really something that can be just adjusted at that point. So this is the point where we want to make sure council is sure of that direction.
Mayor Zahara.
To open up a whole new can of worms. Last week we had a presentation from medically at-risk drivers about transportation options. Within this budget, I know that we do have some funds set aside in a reserve fund that possibly could be used to deal with transportation needs for at-risk seniors who need to get appointments to Edmonton. Is that reflected in this budget? Or do we have money available in this budget if we want to proceed with something in that fashion later this year, or would that be an additional cost? It's kind of a loaded question, but I know we have a meeting with the public coming up on Thursday, so I kind of want to get some information so I have clarity.
Two-part answer to this, and Sarah, if you recollect anything, you can add to it. My recollection is that we have funded transportation efforts largely as we have in the past, which means that there are some funds available to be allocated to transportation efforts in our community, as well as we have some funds that were not expended in 2018 that are currently in reserve. It would just require administration coming back and seeking council's blessing to access those for a different program. I believe that is the intent of our community development group, to come back and request council's approval to go in that direction. I do not think we need to adjust this budget at that level to accomplish that objective.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Wilkinson?
Through the chair, I wasn't at the meeting, but I did watch it. Steve, thank you. I still question the whole fact. I believe this is an Alberta Health matter. And Alberta Health, in many cases in the school system too, we're doing things that really are Alberta Health's mandate. I don't think we need to step up to the plate and do their mandate either, because once we do, it just doesn't end.
Thank you. I think as suggested, this would be brought back specifically for council to consider the medical at-risk driver program and how they might support it or choose otherwise. So.
All right, sounds like we are, Councillor Schneider?
Actually, what was commented earlier, we were gonna set the mill rate, so we asked the question, we didn't answer it, so 3.9. I guess they want direction, so we got direction.
We went around the table, there was agreement on
So,
that.
do you have direction?
Yep.
Yeah.
I feel comfortable.
All right, moving on to finalize capital budget.
Capital budget. So the capital budget, if you notice the sheets I attached, I did attach the one that was in December that passed. The one that we're proposing now is very different from that. I've highlighted the differences in yellow, and thank you. And so we can discuss those as we go through. In the memo I have a little bit of information about each one. For Public Works, there was a landfill truck that has been deferred until 2020. I didn't actually put this on the memo, but they wanted to then instead buy a snow removal box blower for $40,000. I think the truck had been budgeted at $60,000, and they wanted to defer that and buy this box blower. I believe I may have to defer to Mr. Verhege to give a quick.
I don't think they really needed. I think that's pretty
Just-
self-explanatory.
You're quite happy
there.
with that? Okay. Just in case there was any questions on that.
No, I don't think.
That's why we need to do that. With the airport funding, I realised after we had passed the budget in December that I had funded it at a 35-65 split when the airport is 50-50. So it was just an update of the funding for those three items. And then we get to infrastructure. So
Let's come back to that one.
you want to come back to that? Yeah, I think we'll come back to that one. Let's zip forward to parks. We had a truck that had been budgeted at 60,000, which wasn't really enough budget for the truck that they were needing. This trackless contour mower was budgeted at 60. That's actually already been RFP'd out. We have that money. It was for $40,000. So we're just requesting that we move that 20,000 from the trackless mower over to the truck, so that we actually have enough budget within there to get a truck that they would actually need and would be of use for them. So it's just a reallocation of $20,000 there for parks. The multi-use facility, originally we had the 40 million in there. That's not going to happen in 2019. But we've put 5 million in there to cover design, those types of preliminary work that we may start with in 2019. Any questions on those before we jump back up to infrastructure?
Councillor Wilkinson?
Sorry. All right, when you work the budget, do you give these departments their budgets, and then they make a list of what they need, what priorities they have? Is that the way it works?
At the moment, it's very much like that. We go through them and find out priorities. For 2020 and beyond, we're required to give a 5-year capital plan. So you'll be seeing that come forward when we're deliberating our 2020 budgets. So this is a time we would have more of a forecast for you on when some of these things will be coming along. Our asset management plan will also help prioritise some of these things as well. But that's not the only tool we use, obviously, to
Just that
look
these
at capital.
departments have budgeted for these particular things, and then they don't get them because council has decided they shouldn't. I don't know that that's the way employees work well. Like, if you budget and look after your money well, and then you're penalized. So I'm just questioning.
Yeah, thank you. So I think I can address that, Councillor Wilkinson. So typically what happens is we have each department bring forward their capital requests, and so we don't put any constraints on that initially. They can forward what they think, and also it's their responsibility to do their best to estimate the actual costs of completing the capital project, whether it's a piece of equipment or otherwise. And so that's how these were generated by the departments. And in this case, we're actually, for example, in the parks situation, we're actually suggesting they were effective in procuring something below their estimates, and so we want to allow them to use that money to continue to invest in their equipment in parks. So certainly not penalizing anyone for doing well in their procurement
So they're
efforts.
still going to get their trackless contract.
They've already, that purchase has already been made. Yeah, so now it's a known cost. Yeah, yeah. So that's why we're comfortable saying we can reallocate that money. Yeah.
Mayor Zahara?
And sometimes too, some of these things may come out to tender and may come out way over budget, so that may get deferred to a future year, or if they are able to find money in the budget somewhere, it might come back to us for reconsideration.
I would certainly add to that, and council in the past has been quite respectful of this, is if we've come back and in any given year we've had to choose between one piece or another, council has generally deferred to our staff and our operational people to say, we'd rather have this truck than that piece of equipment. Council's generally been respectful of that, and we appreciate that, because it is ultimately the staff and their boots on the ground getting the work done, and they have the best, I think, feel for what will help them accomplish their objectives.
Just some plans are made, it must be disappointing. Thing with when we get the infrastructure here, I guess you wonder why you made the plans if it's not important now. Just don't forget that.
Mayor Zahara?
Yes, up to the snow removal box blower. So is this a larger blower for the equipment that we leased this year? Is that what that's for?
Mr. Chairman, through to your worship. Actually, the box blower was a requirement we had during the middle of the year, basically January, February. Our purchase of the ribbon blower, which was purchased with our Willys, broke. The replacement pieces for it were nearly a quarter of the actual cost of the unit. When bringing this to the supplier as an issue, they indicated that, oh, we bought the wrong piece of equipment, and they suggested this piece of equipment, so we demoed it, and it held up significantly better. We're still not entirely 100% sold compared to a purpose-built blower at an industrial level capacity, which was what we previously had, though at a much higher cost. And we do currently have the Willys within our fleet. So the decision was that either we had to start renting blowers, which is not something you can do, to maintain our snow clearing program this year, or we had to work with the supplier to get the box blower. Since we used it for the remainder then of the winter, it became something that was essential for us to continue to provide that level of service. So, but I would not say that it's amazing. Yeah, it's more, and then we are still negotiating exactly whether we can return certain pieces, whether the ribbon blower and so on can be done. So we're negotiating partly on how that might work.
Mayor Zahara?
Yeah, further just a comment to administration. I much prefer us getting the equipment that we need instead of trying to work with something that may not be working, as we don't need operationally slowing down snow removal when there's lots of snow. It's has been a challenge last winter, so I'd suggest that if you need more money to get something better, then that's something that we should be looking at sooner rather than later.
I would just suggest this won't be the last you hear of it, but we do feel it is the best solution in the immediate term to carry on with our program.
Okay, so we'll move back to infrastructure, where you can see most of the changes have occurred. We had the street rehab approved as a lump sum in December, and now we've sort of broken out into some singular projects to just show those amounts, including some emergent issues that have come up. For the actual street rehab itself, 184,000 that's shown. That is for the design of those original projects that were in the 2019 street rehab. So that's the design of those to have them ready to go out for tender. The 47th Street Kinsman upgrade, I think this was part of the original 2019 street rehab with a little bit extra added on for that. At the moment we're funding this, funded that from grants, which is from MSI.
If I may just add to that, there was a conversation when this was brought forward before. This does support the Parkland Lodge sewer construction. So I had misspoke when I said they weren't related. It is related to that, which is why we administratively, operationally feel it's critical that that piece go forward this season and is proposed.
And wasn't it originally 7th Avenue and Kinsman Park? This is saying 47th Street.
Well, 47th Street would be the street that basically goes right through the middle of Kinsman Park.
Mr. Chairman, Council, if it pleases you, I can show the review I did through our municipal servicing plan. Oh,
No, keep going.
Okay, thanks.
municipal
Well, I thought it
servicing
was the
plan.
street down in front of the red brick into the Kinsman
And so
Park originally.
the section we're dealing with essentially goes through this area. Originally, it was only dealing with this interior piece of sewer, and we may be able within this budget to manage the design water as well. But we found that there is actually, and it's a little bit hard to zoom in without me being in front of the computer, but let me just put this here.
Okay.
And so the extension would essentially come from the developed road through the park. Right now, the issue is that this existing line, which wouldn't necessarily require replacement but does require additional capacity, goes directly underneath the Kinsman playground or water park. We would be require actually redesign to go around it, which is the most cost-effective way not to damage that infrastructure. And then, as we had only planned to go to this area and then continue to 7th, in review of our capacity and our issues within the MSP, we noticed that this piece did require approval, or require finishing. So we reviewed that with our expected capacity upgrades, and we're basically taking this extent right here, right to the intersection west of the older care facility, and making sure that we're making sure that it's done in totality, because the one thing we want to ensure is that when we do bid this work and have it move forward, we're only interfering with that park, hopefully off hours. We're hoping to do this after August if we can, so that we're not interfering with the public use of that capacity, that issue. It should still give us time before this comes online, and then this can be bid out as a larger project in the future when necessary. And we don't believe we'll have an issue with this portion. We want to do all of this at once so that the interruption's limited. So.
Just originally, I thought it went out in front of the red brick school there. I think that was street we have there, and then this went into the park and over.
You're right. The original design was to simply do this work right here, and the amount we would only do these two manholes, which would become 3 right around the park. The intention is to do this entire bit so that we're not interfering with that public facility more than once.
Councillor Shannon?
What I'm looking for is clarification. It says Bench Creek stabilization 2019, wasn't that 18? But it says 814,000. Wasn't that last year's?
If I may, do you mind if we complete this item before we move on to the other ones?
Mayor Zahara?
So yeah, just further to Councillor Wilkinson's point. So what is the plan for the 7th Avenue project? That would be a 2020 project, or is that no longer deemed necessary to be done? Just for clarity's sake.
Mr. Chairman, through to your worship, I would say that all of the work that we had designed through the street rehab is still something that needs to be done.
Right,
however, with that being such a major project with a full reconstruction of the road, one, we won't have any further degradation of that infrastructure. It won't cost us any more to delay it, really, especially since we're not expecting to get a good return bidding at this point in time. So we would still think that the best way to get our best value for that 7th Avenue project is to do it all in one length, to do it all in one season, but to bid it more competitively in the coming year here. Yeah, that's correct.
Used to do it.
Yeah, you'll notice in the memo that this proposed plan leaves us with about $2 million that would go back into the infrastructure reserve that could be applied to that project in future years, as soon as 2020.
Mayor Zahara again.
Yeah, just further, just for administration to consider. I know that our 1st Avenue road is quickly deteriorating. I think that's going to become a larger priority. I don't know if administration has done a review recently of that. Something I do want to talk about, strategic planning, but I think that should be one of our top priorities, as that road seems to be failing on both on the overpass side and in the town side.
Thank you. Thank you. And any future capital expenditures will obviously be at the discretion of council, and priorities can be set by council if you wish to address emergent issues such as First Avenue.
Okay, thank you.
So moving on, the next project we are proposing is stormwater management. It includes the Wass Creek drainage, I believe was spoken about at another meeting, and also some purchase of material to manage a general stormwater program. If there's any questions on that particular project.
This was also largely inside the
Yes.
street rehab project that was proposed originally in the fall.
Okay, I'll move on. The next one we're proposing is for the snow dump. I believe this was brought forward to you at the April 9th committee meeting as an emergent issue. So we have reallocated some of those road rehab monies to this project. That is also going to be funded from grants, from the MSI grant. Any further? I think that was talked about at the meeting quite a bit. So next one we're proposing is talking about the new cell for the landfill. Due to the fire, the current cell is obviously being closed permanently. So to bring back the same level of service, another cell will have to be prepared and open. We're showing this funded from grants. We're actually for our portion of it there, the 325 is coming from the federal gas tax grant, and 175 would be from the county as our cost sharing partners for the landfill. Of course, it won't proceed until the notification is received from the county that they also agree to their part of the funding. So, okay, I'll move on. Bench Creek stabilisation. So it was approved during 2018, and this is the residual amount of the project to be paid in 2019. Also included is 150 to complete the project. So there was an original total of 950. That budget now for the whole project is 1.1 million. We funded that from both the unrestricted surplus of 405 and infrastructure reserve of 260. They were approved at a motion in 2018. And the additional 150 is showing coming from the revenue sharing reserve. It's all funded from reserves, just different ones.
Councillor Curry.
Through the chair, what happened with the 950 to 1.1?
To be clear, I believe it was under 700 to start, and then it kept
It
going.
was. But we had gone up to 950, but what?
Thank you. Yeah. So, how much time do you want me to take to answer your question? I think so this project was obviously challenged from early on in the process, and there was some weather concerns, some design changes, which led to some cost uncertainties. And I think that's been the major contributor to the budgetary adjustments. This is in the end, this is what the cost was to complete the design that was undertaken.
Councillor Chenard.
Okay, so just be clarified, I think last year in our budget, if I'm remembering right, Bench Creek, I think we were at just under 700,000 budgeted. Did we have the money budgeted, or are we just for 19? Because now, if we're looking at that, now it's 814, so now we're over $1 million. I guess at the end of the day, is this finally the last cost for this project?
Thank you. Yes, council will not see this project again beyond this.
Okay, but then still my further question, did we not budget 600,000 last year?
The budget amount not necessarily is what we spend in a given year.
Okay.
So you could budget 600 last year. We spent about 280, I can't remember exactly, but 200 and something thousand. we have to pay for the work in the year it is done, right? So we may have budgeted in 18, but some of that work was done in 19. We can't put that cost into 18 if the work was not done in that year. So the budget and the actual could be very different with any project like that, especially if it goes over a year like this.
Okay, so what I'm saying is if we budgeted, so then part of the surplus, if we budgeted for 700,600 and change, then we spent 2, so the extra 5 would be actually the surface or the surplus carried over.
Is included in this.
Yes. Okay. I was just wanting clarification. I thought these numbers are lying up.
If I may just to add to this as well, so I worked closely with the contractor to reduce the anticipated number by about $100,000 by some measures that the contractor was willing to take, as well as the town has taken on some responsibility. So we certainly have made every effort we can to control the costs on this. Administration is not pleased with the outcome of this project and does not expect council to be pleased with it, but it is the reality of where we are today.
Councilor Bear?
Through the chair to administration, so for the 150,000, what has to be completed from where we're at to get us to that 150?
Yeah, sure, thank you. So the remaining efforts are, as you I'm sure have seen, will be the final landscaping. The largest part of the work completed is there is actually a geotech armoring process that will go on. 6 to 8 feet above the wall there will be a geotech fabric that will be placed. Once seated, it's placed on top of that, it becomes part of the bank. This is to protect from high water, from rain events or that type of thing, so that bank remains stable, which is the outcome of that. But that's the single largest part. Then there's just final grading, seeding, and site cleanup that needs to be taken. So the vast majority of the work of the project is completed.
Councilor Wilkinson?
Through the chair, what did the RFP come in for this Bench Creek stabilization project? What did we accept?
Yes, thank you. I believe that number was about $690,000.
So why didn't we stick to that?
As mentioned earlier, there was some weather-related issues and delays. Eventually, that led to a design change, which then led to some cost adjustments, increases in this case, that were brought forward and proved to council to the $950,000. Unfortunately, that did not allow us to get to the completion of the project, which is why we're asking for that additional money to
This is
finalize
almost
that.
double what he bid the job at.
Here's a here.
Yeah, and I think to be clear, that project in scope changed drastically over the course of where we went. As we've had hours of discussion on this project with our former engineer on this, we were into it. It had to get done. We've bid this project twice. Each time we had one bidder. And we didn't have a great uptake on it. It's unfortunate that it has evolved to this. I'm not happy about it. I was not happy about the 950. I'm not happy about the 1.1, but we were into it. It had to be done. It had to be completed. We see this sometimes happen with these types of projects. So, as you know, we have made some changes internally, and I hope that we don't have this problem in the future.
Mayor, Councilor Bevan?
Yeah, I'm not happy with this either, and I expressed my displeasure the last time, and I didn't want us going out for another bid on it, which obviously came in higher than it was the first time. And that's what happens when we kind of second guess ourselves or whatever, because there's only one contractor wants to bid on this. So I think, we're lucky at times to get one, sometimes we get none, sometimes we get 3 or 4. But the question was asked before, this guy was not really given to us in a clear way of how he was going to do it, and this is what we ended up with right now. So I'm same thing, not happy the way it went, but it's done. We got to pay for it now. That's it.
My comment is I'm extremely not happy either, and if there was something I could do about it, then I would do it, but I don't see any option for myself. And I blame the bidding process and the way we put this out. So hopefully we can do a better job next time in securing a more reliable, accurate quote and holding contractors to account. All right.
So moving on, the wastewater treatment plant. This 100,000 is to cover the completion of the engineering contract while the construction is all completed. We did have a contract with the engineers, and there's some final invoices still coming from the engineering company for the wastewater treatment plant. We're suggesting funding that from the infrastructure reserve. So those are the changes and amendments to the capital budget that was presented and passed in December.
We still have two more, right?
We jumped down and then jumped back up there.
We did a distribution.
We don't want to talk about Vision Park?
Oh yes, yeah. You're talking
And
about
the lagoon
the additions there, yes, that aren't listed on the item.
Oh, sorry. Yes, that's right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sure.
That's very yes, so in addition to what we have shown here, actually I just jump back to this for now. Originally the original budget for the 19 road rehab was 6.5 million, funded 3.8 from grants, 2.7 from the infrastructure reserve. So with these above adjustments, the budget is using 2.3 million of the original 3.8 million for grant funding, and about 350 of the reserves that we were using. The remaining grant monies will remain in the grant program for us to use in the future, and we are suggesting that the remainder that was going to come from the RSA reserve to pay for that the extra work in road rehab be moved to the infrastructure reserve for future infrastructure projects. We had already allocated it for road rehab, not using all of it, so just wanting to move that over. So you'll see that reflected in your revised reserve sheet that you'll have in front of you as well. So moving on, in addition to what was presented, we'd like to bring forward two other projects for your consideration at this time. And it's a well and washroom in Vision Park for a cost of around 150. This is for the design for a combined well house and washroom site at the park. That well produces large quantity of water. That's the well that has the manganese in the water. So this well house will be equipped with a plant capable of treating that to remove the manganese to help provide water for the town. And the washroom facility at Vision Park right now is not up to standard. Reached its end of life, we shall say. And so to build one of those together we think is quite a good idea. So for this we're asking for the design work to be completed so that the project can be shovel ready for the future year.
So 150 is just for design?
That's just for the design, because it is a plant that will be removing that water from manganese from the water.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Chairman, members of council, we had a previous quote that's some years old, so we're not fine with proceeding with it without having a design done. But the filtration for that type of well and manganese requirement that we have was in the order of around that $500,000 to $600,000 range to create a well house and filtration system that would meet it. However, the ability for us to tie in additional wells within that area and create a small plant while at the same time providing for that public amenity, which is now a wanting need in that area, provides kind of a unique opportunity for us to address water volumes, water security, as well as something we can cut the ribbon on that we can look at and use every day within the community. That's not just a utility.
And if I may additionally add to that, I think as was suggested by members of council, some challenges in the bidding process of some capital projects, Bench Creek in particular. You can expect to see this approach much more in the future, which is complete the design work as a individual part of the process, which I think will put us in a better position to address some of those issues that we've seen with some projects.
Councillor Curry?
To administration, I'm not sure which one of you guys can answer my question. For future, if the plant was done to do that water well with manganese, Is that operating cheaper to treat that issue than our major fluoride issue that we tend to have in our other wells? Is it cheaper to treat?
Mhm. Mr. Chairman, through to Councillor Curry, I will defer to Darren. However, we don't have, I don't believe, accurate costs to provide you just at this time.
Okay.
The one thing I will note is that we always have a method of treating water. We do not always have a method of finding water.
Mhm.
And spending significant resources to drill holes trying to find water can be a really great solution or bear no fruit. Whereas treating water that you know you have that's secured through a license provides immediate gain for the investment that you put in. So it's a known asset. But I'll defer to whether Darren
If I
has
may,
any
just
comments
before we
on
jump to
fluoride.
Darren, I just suggested to add to that. So we've, council has committed, since I've been here, and I think for previous years before that, $300,000 a year for water well exploration. If we were to just have invested in this particular facility, we could have had that known quantity of water in our system for quite some time, and so we're just suggesting that as the preferred course of action at this stage. My understanding of the fluoride situation is that it's almost a completely separate part of our water system, and I don't know that they would impact each other, but I would leave that for Darren to clarify.
Councilor Curry, through the chair. Yeah, we've been actually quite successful recently with the changes to well 25 and a few of the other wells we've had online. So we've been successful in blending the fluoride, which has dropped the levels all around town. And that's why we had looked at, we really have a need, especially with the hospital on that end of town, of extra facilities, meaning existing water we already have a license for. Alberta Environment recently made an MAC, so a maximum level concentration of manganese. Before it was just an aesthetic objective. So that's kind of made it now, we are mandated if we use that well to be able to treat it. So we just thought we have 2 other wells in the exploration program that would also benefit from this treatment facility. And we also thought it would be a great idea to have that extra volume of water, plus to have another facility that's already needed in that area to be able to streamline everything. So, and as for, we're not really sure the cost yet of just to treat that one fluoride well could be significantly higher than just the cost, and what the water we're getting out of that would be a great benefit to the town, both financially and much needed of water in that end of the town.
Just a follow-up to that? I would fully support doing that, because I completely agree with you, Mr. Jericho. If we have water that we have already found that is available and is there, I think we should be using it.
Councillor Baird?
Through the church administration, I got 2 comments. One regarding the water well. I think that's a good method to proceed, especially if we could eliminate that 318 every year. I did have a question though on the wastewater treatment plant. I thought a few meetings ago administration told us that everything has already been paid for that, so I'm kind of surprised that there is still invoices coming in.
Mr. Chairman, through to Councillor Baer. I had a meeting with the AECOM, our engineers on that program, reviewing their contract, which I did in February, and I've confirmed multiple times and in writing with confirmation from their principals what their contract included. They did present to me information which showed that they had actually, they've incurred additional costs, quite a few additional costs on our project. So their put forward was to complete their contract. And so we agreed that we would meet our contractual obligations for payment, which they have $97,000, et cetera, $1,000 left within their contract. But we've agreed that that is all we're willing to pay. And so that's what this represents, is us meeting our contractual obligations that have already been entered into.
I'm in full support of the Vision Park well and washroom design work for 2019. Councillor Chenard?
Just so I understand it, so this well is out at Vision Park right now, and so we would treat it, and then we'd have to put in a secondary pump for proper pressure, is that correct? Because it wouldn't be hooked to our regular water system, so it would need its own pump to run it, correct?
Mr. Chairman, through to Councillor Chouinard.
Yeah.
Essentially what we would do is we would seek to design this as a larger structure, which actually functions as a mini water treatment plant, drawing from actually several wells and potentially future wells in that area, and then does lead into and pressurize into our system. We actually do have wells in there that do connect to our system. Unfortunately, one well that's out there is connected to our system, but it's not being used for the simple reason that it has other health-related concerns that we couldn't bring it on, we couldn't resolve, so.
Councillor Wilkinson?
Just a question, if you're not applying to look for new wells, are you going to be penalized at all by the government when you need to? Like, should you be putting in an application anyway, just so you've got the right to be looking for water when you need to?
Mr. Chairman, through Councillor Wilkinson, my understanding is right now we're actually working on several programs and studies to submit to environment, so we are still working on that issue overall
Yeah,
to
you
solve
hate to
our
be
larger
behind.
system of water. Water security is definitely an issue that we
Yes.
need to be cognizant of continually as a municipality.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, we're looking to access known resources versus trying to find different ones.
Okay, thank you.
You have
So
consensus?
generally in favour of an addition to the capital budget for the design? Okay. The other one was mentioned in the report earlier about the lagoon receiving station. So though as was shown earlier, the lagoons are still on site and need to be remediated. This is an opportunity for it to become a receiving station for the trucks to deliver waste pumped from septic systems, as was mentioned earlier. So there's a price tag on that of about $630,000. So we're asking for your for discussion and direction on whether you'd like that added to the budget as well.
Mayor Zahara.
I commend administration for coming up with that plan. I think it's a great way forward and develops an asset, and I thank you guys for looking outside the box.
Perhaps a silver lining to the fact that our capital plan didn't go according to plan. So,
To be clear, this is a future revenue stream?
I would suggest that it allows us to more responsibly handle the waste that we are already taking in, and we do generate revenue. However, generally our philosophy has been cost recovery in that. But with this expanded facility, does that open up more possibilities for revenue generation? Absolutely.
Mr. Chairman, through the council, I mean, just as some examples of how this might benefit us as a 24-hour facility, it no longer needs to be necessarily manned. We have the ability to know who all of the people who are dumping are. We can isolate security for the site, which actually helps us in management of our wastewater treatment plant generally. Also, some trucks can be of a certain volume and some of a much larger volume. This allows us to deal with not a per dump cost, but maybe a per liter cost or metric cube. And so it allows us to be much more responsive depending on the type of business we see emerging for that facility.
I'm in full support. Any other?
Okay.
Councillor Shenard?
So if we're in favor of these, it will not affect our 3.9 mill rate though, right? You're just asking, so I would totally agree with them. They all make sense. It doesn't affect the 3.9.
I am proposing that we fund these from MSI.
Okay.
So that would leave about 720 MSI money for future years to be allocated along with the future years money. So, okay, so I will go ahead.
Oh,
Just
Councillor.
one question, you do have the MSI, you have those grants already?
Yes, on the, sorry, I suppose
Yeah,
I should,
it says grants
yes,
there,
this column
and
here
you do have those in
is the
your
grants.
possession.
So yes, all of these are using MSI money that we have or federal gas tax fund money that we have. And it wasn't using all of what had been allocated to the road rehab, so there is a little bit left for us to do these projects, and still leaving a little bit remaining that we can carry over to next year as well.
Well, when we didn't get the 2 million, you know, it is nice to have something left over, yeah.
All right, so I will add these two items to the capital budget, and that will come back on the 7th to be passed. Okay. Moving on, just the reserves. I believe you were given a revised sheet than the one that was first given. You'll see I've in yellow I've highlighted that the infrastructure reserve will be more than 1 million. It will be 3 million. That's that extra money that we are not using in this year's road rehab money is going towards the infrastructure reserve instead of staying within the revenue sharing reserve. So we had the 6 million budgeted for our road rehab with I'm getting my figures mixed up now. 2.9 2.7 coming from the revenue sharing reserve to pay for this part of the 6 million. We're not using all of the 6 million, so I'm putting the residual of that over into infrastructure to make sure that it is allocated for future infrastructure projects. It doesn't get lost in anything else.
Councillor Wilkinson?
Okay, and you found $2,186,000 that we're not spending this year then on road construction.
That's correct.
Okay, all right.
So that would be.
Just while this budget's up here too with cemetery, I see you've got it at 77,000. I know that they got in the habit of hiring a caretaker person a month later than usual, and I don't know why that would have happened, because I think if you're there longer, you've got a better chance to keep it maintained. Like, it's a lot of work. Just a thought.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes.
Our cemetery is manned now by our full-time park staff, so.
Oh, all right, you don't hire the lady anymore?
No, we
Okay.
do not, we do not rely on seasonal caretaking
Okay, good,
anymore.
good, because that was a hard job, I think, for
Yeah.
her, when it was a month later. Okay.
So yes, so as far as the rest of reserves, which I've just shown here, after we now know the 2018 year-end balances, and then the budget that's been presented today would show those proposed balances for 2019. And so that's
So
the-
just to clarify, the capital reserve went down, but we put 5 million into the budget for 2019.
which reserve?
Well,
The multi-use
overall-
facility,
Oh,
yes.
yes.
Right.
Yes.
So we likely won't be spending that 5 million this year, but it is available now, should we want to move forward. Yep.
Mayor Zahari.
Yes, through to administration, please refresh me on what the Public Reserve Trust Reserve is for.
Certainly.
Thank you.
We have an amount that's kept in an actual separate bank account as per the MGA for municipal reserve. It's for developments. When there's a development, correct me if I'm wrong this time, development where there was supposed to be a certain amount of green space involved with a development. Sometimes the developer, for whatever reason, sort of defers on that, but they must pay us money for that. And we put that in a separate account for future parks, development of new parks. And that is that reserve. That's the money that we've received from developers for municipal reserve, plus any interest earned on that money in that bank account as well goes into that reserve. And can only be used for new parks.
Mayor Zahara.
Just answer my question, thank you.
Oh,
Can't use it for
I know.
existing parks.
Councillor Chenard.
So future civic and culture, the 2,018,000 was none, that is the reserve we're building for future arts and culture, am I correct?
That's correct.
Okay, I just want a clarification, so there is 2 million going into it this year. Okay.
Councillor Wilkinson.
just back to that public reserve fund, is that like for a green park? We couldn't have used it for the playground that we built at Hill.
Yeah, no,
Green
thank you.
space.
It's also for requirements for school sites and other things of that
Public use.
nature. It's not for playground parks
You
and
couldn't count
that type of
Okay,
thing, so.
Public use.
Yeah, yeah, no.
Mayor Zahara.
Yes, sorry. I'm having flashbacks from when I first got on council in 2007, the Johnson Estates general area that has been sitting there for over a decade. What are our options for that?
I believe it was originally for the stormwater pond that's there. We collected it from the developers that did that area. I think it's sat there. If there was going to be an expansion, I'm really not sure. It's been there since I've been here, as long as I've been here as well. But it was definitely put aside for that stormwater pond. I have been looking at whether we can move that just into a general infrastructure or start a storm reserve as well with that, and sort of start building up those specific things as well.
Just a fund, a pot of money there that we can't
Yeah.
do anything with, so let's look at options.
Okay, so that's the revised budget as presented today. I will bring that back on the 7th to be passed, along with the mill rate bylaw, and get ready to send our taxes out.
Perfect.
Thank you. Okay, moving on, no community services, protective services, information items, no sundry items. Questions from media and public regarding items from this meeting?
I just have the one question. Will any information be provided to us following the closed session meeting as it concerns the multiplex?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No, it's an informational briefing for council. There'll be no additional information for public after that.
Okay.
She probably wants to go home for dinner, I'm guessing.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I apologize, I have a couple of questions regarding the land transfer. What kind of time frame are we talking about once the process is advertised before it's completed? Like, are we talking weeks, months? Any idea?
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, to the public. We were a requirement under Section 70 to advertise for 2 weeks, so we would anticipate bringing this out to council from the last meeting in May, if we could. Once council has declared it surplus and then chosen to direct us to complete the sale of property, we could complete the transfer likely within the week, provided we can get everything signed and notarized, etc. That would then be sent to land titles. They have publicized their turnaround right now as about 2.5 weeks. So depending on the time frame it takes the government to register the transfer, that can be done likely within June.
And just for clarification, I wasn't sure if it's been a long meeting for the public as well. Just during your presentation, did you say that the golf club didn't show up as part of the not-for-profit? Or did you say that we were?
Mr. Chairman, we reviewed the list of not-for-profits that are provided by the Alberta registries, and we did not find the Edson Golf Club shown as a member. We found different associations for golf clubs in there. We didn't find your legal name in that listing.
Okay, because we are registered as a not-for-profit under the Societies Act. So I can provide the registration if that changes the process, but since 1955, we've been registered as a not-for-profit society, so I'm not sure why we didn't show up in the listing.
Mr. Chairman, the only difference that would make is we wouldn't have to advertise, but we'd still require time to prepare all the notifications to bring the report to council.
Okay. So, may I suggest you provide whatever you have? We will still need to check with the province to make sure that they are registered, but other than that, then that simplifies things.
Yeah, if I may as well, and just through Mr. Linford, certainly I appreciate the club's looking forward to consolidating, control of their operation in that property. I would just add administratively, we just want to make sure that it's a clean transfer, and so we're going to take our time to make sure that we're not handing you anything that might have a future encumbrance or any other issues, up to and including a conversation about the potential of closing that roadway and consolidating the title. If we do that prior to the process, that might be a lot quicker and a lot smoother and a lot easier, even if it means a little more time up front. But at the end, it's just our intent to give you a nice clean land transfer there.
You just anticipated my third question, which was about the right-of-way. Obviously, I wasn't around when the land transfer occurred. That was 1980s. I'm wondering if the right-of-way was created at that time when the land transfer went from the golf club to the town. And I'm wondering if that right-of-way still needed to exist, whether it was created to provide access to the golf course property or whether it was created to provide access to the campground property. And I'm wondering if we're changing the land title, why wouldn't we take a look at that right-of-way at the same time?
Yeah. Thank you. I share that opinion as well. And if it serves no purpose, it's much better to clean that off and not have it there, because then 10 years from now people will be asking the question, what's up with this little piece of road here? And so if we can take care of it at this time, I would suggest that we would look at it. So.
And my last comment is just I'd like to thank the town council for staying with us, the golf club, during this whole process, and we definitely thank them for the support that they've shown both publicly and at the meetings, so that we can hopefully get this process completed so that everybody's satisfied. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Keith.
You're not going to stop coming, are you, Keith?
Depends how long the process is.
I was going to say, I thought you were going to say depends how long the meetings are going to be. That was like 2 hours ago we were talking about that.
So, seeing no other questions from the public, we need a motion to go into closed meeting session.
Yeah, so Hart made the motion.
I can make a motion,
Okay,
I think
no,
we're-
first we'll have the recess.
Oh, okay.
So, very quick.
I think it would be easier to have the motion first and be done, and then everyone can clear the
According
room
to
and
George
everything
Cuff,
like that, but.
just a matter of process, we should actually recess and then make the motion.
I'm correct. And I have the gavel. So we will recess for 2 minutes.
2
Go ahead.
We don't have to follow the 3 hours.
Could we have a motion to go in camera, please?
I'll make the motion.
Councillor Chenard makes a motion, all in favor? Motion passed.
Motion paid a lot.
We have a motion to adjourn.
Can do that.
Councillor Chenard makes that motion. All in favor?
Thank you so much for your